What would you do if the woman sleeping on your couch turned out to be worth $3 billion? Ryan Hayes didn't ask for any of this. He was a 32-year-old delivery driver trying to keep the lights on and his daughter fed. One rainy night, he made a simple choice. He let a stranger in from the cold. That one decision would tear his quiet life apart, drag him into a world he never wanted, and force him to confront something far more dangerous than poverty. The truth. Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. The storm came in fast that Tuesday evening, the way bad weather always does in late October in the city, without warning and without apology. One minute the sky was a dull, bruised purple, the kind that made people glance up on their way out of work and think I should have grabbed my jacket. The next minute it was splitting open, sheets of cold rain hammering the pavement, gutters flooding, and everyone on the sidewalk breaking into a run for the nearest overhang. Ryan Hayes was not running. He was already soaked. He'd been soaked for the better part of 40 minutes, sitting in gridlock on Meridian Avenue in his beat-up white delivery van with the heat that only worked on one side and the left wiper blade that had been smearing instead of clearing since August. His phone was mounted to the dash, the GPS barking at him to take a left turn he'd already missed because a garbage truck was blocking the lane. And somewhere in the background, barely audible under the rain pounding the roof, a children's podcast was playing from the back seat. That was the one thing he hadn't turned off. Chloe's podcast stayed on, always. Even when she wasn't in the van. It was a habit he'd picked up sometime in the last year, maybe longer, a way of keeping her present with him through the long hours he spent behind the wheel. 16, sometimes 18 hours some days. The Roots didn't care that he had a 7-year-old at home. The invoices didn't care either. Ryan reached up and adjusted the rear view mirror out of reflex, even though the back of the van was loaded with packages and there was nothing to see. He caught a glimpse of his own face in the process. Tired eyes, jaw rough with 3 days of stubble, the beginning of a tension headache gathering behind his left temple, and looked away. He was 32 years old. Some mornings he felt 50. By the time he cleared the gridlock, finished his last 2 drops, and pulled into the parking lot of the Meridian Valley Grocery on Clement Street, it was 6:47 in the evening. He still had to pick up Chloe's cough syrup, the kind she liked, the grape-flavored one, not the cherry, she'd told him very seriously the last time he'd grabbed the wrong bottle, and a loaf of bread, and something for dinner that wasn't the third night of boxed mac and cheese. He was mentally calculating whether he could get away with the mac and cheese again when he heard it, not the crash, the cry. It was small, high-pitched, more surprise than pain at first, and then, a beat later, full pain. The kind of sound a child makes when they've fallen and the shock wears off and the reality sets in all at once. Ryan was out of the van before he'd consciously decided to move. The grocery store entrance had one of those long covered walkways that people used to load their cars without getting drenched, and at the end of it, near a concrete pillar where the overhang didn't quite reach, a little girl was sitting on the wet ground with both hands pressed to her knee, crying with the kind of whole-body shaking that meant she'd been trying to hold it in before she couldn't anymore. That was Chloe, his daughter. His daughter, sitting on the wet ground in the rain, her pink backpack half slipped off one shoulder, her sneakers soaked through. Chloe. He was already moving, crouching down, hands reaching for her. Hey, I got you. I'm right here. Daddy? She said it like an exhale, like she'd been holding her breath waiting for him. Her knee was scraped raw. Not serious. He'd seen worse. She'd had worse. But it was bleeding a little, and the cold rain hadn't helped, and she was shaking. Okay, he said, pulling her close. Okay, I see it. You're all right. I slipped, she said, hiccuping between sobs. There was water, and I slipped, and it hurts. I know it does. He was doing a quick mental inventory. He didn't have a first aid kit on him. He barely had a paper towel. He looked up, half expecting to find the usual small crowd that gathered around hurt children in public, the well-meaning strangers offering reassurances. Most people had barely glanced over. A man in a business suit stepped around them without slowing down. A woman with 2 shopping bags adjusted her path slightly and kept moving. A teenager in earbuds didn't look up at all. It was such a small moment, and it shouldn't have hit him the way it did. People were in a hurry. It was raining. He got it. He'd probably walked past 100 situations without stopping in his life. But something about watching his daughter sit on wet concrete, bleeding, while an entire stream of people flowed around her like water around a stone. It sat wrong in his stomach in a way he couldn't shake. Then he heard footsteps that stopped. He looked up. The woman was crouching down before he could register much about her. Mid-30s, maybe? Or younger and worn thin? Hard to tell. Dark hair plastered to her face from the rain. She was wearing a sweater that looked like it had once been expensive, the kind with a fine knit that looked completely wrong for this kind of weather. No jacket, no umbrella, soaked through just like Chloe. She wasn't looking at Ryan, she was looking at Chloe. "Hey," she said quietly, and her voice was steady. Not the bright performative warmth some strangers used with kids. The "oh sweetie" voice, just steady, calm, like she was talking to a person. "That looks like it really stings." Chloe looked up at her with wet eyes and nodded seriously. "Scraped knees are the worst," the woman said. She was already pulling off her sweater, just pulling it right off in the rain, and she had a thin long sleeve underneath that immediately darkened with water, and folding it into something roughly the shape of a bandage. "Can I?" Chloe looked at Ryan. Ryan was still processing. He nodded. The woman pressed the folded sweater firmly but gently against Chloe's knee, not hesitant about it, not squeamish, just matter of fact, like she'd done something like this before, or like the doing of it was simply obvious to her. "Hold that there," she told Chloe. "Press hard. It'll slow down the bleeding." "Okay," Chloe said. She pressed. "Good." The woman glanced up at Ryan then, and for a second their eyes met. Hers were dark brown, and they were tired in a way that went deeper than just tonight. "She should probably get inside and out of the cold." "Yeah," Ryan said, finding his voice. "Yeah, absolutely. Here." He moved to scoop Chloe up. "I can walk," Chloe announced with the dignity only a 7-year-old could muster while sitting in a puddle. "I know you can," Ryan said. "I'm carrying you anyway." She allowed it. He stood with her in his arms, rain still coming down, and looked at the woman who was now rising to her feet. She had the ruined sweater in her hands. It was going to stain, if it hadn't already. And she was wringing it slightly, like she didn't quite know what to do with it now. "Thank you," Ryan said. "Really? You didn't have to—" "It's fine." She said it fast, like she didn't want the gratitude to land. "No, seriously." He shifted Chloe's weight to one arm. Do you need—" He wasn't even sure what he was about to ask. She was soaked. She had no jacket. It was 40-something degrees. "Do you have somewhere to be right now?" Something crossed her face, gone before he could name it. "I'm okay," she said, but she didn't move. And Ryan had been tired and busy and running on empty for long enough that he might have just taken her at her word and gone inside. He almost did. He had one foot already turned toward the entrance. Then Chloe said from his arms, in her clear 7-year-old voice, "You look cold. You should come inside too." Her name was Victoria. She offered it like she expected him to need something else after it. A last name, an explanation, a context. And when Ryan just said, "I'm Ryan," that's Chloe, and didn't push, something in her posture shifted. Not relaxed exactly, but slightly less braced. They stood in the grocery store entrance while Chloe's knee got properly cleaned with a first aid kit from the customer service desk. Ryan had asked, the teenage employee had produced it with the practiced boredom of someone who'd done it many times. And Victoria stood to the side, still holding the ruined sweater, not quite in the way, but not quite out of it either. Chloe kept talking to her. That was the thing about Chloe. She didn't do awkward silences. She just filled them. She told Victoria about her scraped knee from last spring, which had been way worse, and about how her teacher, Ms. Callahan, said you should always clean wounds right away or they get infected, and about how she didn't like the antiseptic wipes because they stung even when people said they wouldn't. Victoria listened, not politely, actually listened. Asked which knee had been the one last spring. Asked if Ms. Callahan was her favorite teacher, crouched down to be at Chloe's eye level when she answered, even though the floor was wet. Ryan watched this while he put away the first aid supplies and tried to figure out what was going on with this woman, not in a suspicious way. More in the way you watch someone who doesn't quite add up. The way her clothes didn't match. Not just the expensive, then destroyed sweater, but the whole look of her. The shoes that had probably cost more than Ryan's monthly grocery budget, but were now caked in street grime. the small but obvious signs of someone who hadn't slept properly in a while. He wasn't a detective. He was a delivery driver who'd seen enough of the city from ground level to know when something wasn't adding up. He grabbed a cart and pushed it down the first aisle. "You're welcome to walk with us," he said without looking back, "while you wait for the rain to slow down." She walked with them. She didn't offer to help him shop. She didn't ask questions about his list or make suggestions. She just walked beside them. And when Chloe grabbed his sleeve and pointed to the cereal that had a cartoon character on it and declared it necessary, Victoria covered a small sound that might have been a laugh. Ryan tossed the cereal in the cart. He'd been planning to say no on principle. He was in the bread aisle when he asked, almost casually, "Do you have a car nearby, or—" "No," Victoria said. "I don't." "Were you going somewhere specific tonight?" A beat. "No," she said again. Ryan stopped the cart. He looked at her directly, and she met his gaze, and neither of them said anything for a moment. There was no dramatic music, no soft lighting, just fluorescent grocery store overhead lights, and the squeak of a cart somewhere in the next aisle over. And Chloe, who had moved ahead and was crouched in front of a shelf examining soup cans with intense concentration. "Okay," Ryan said. "Okay what?" "Okay, you can stay tonight." He pushed the cart forward. "Couch isn't comfortable, but it's dry." Victoria stared at him. "I'm a stranger," she said. "Yeah. You don't know anything about me. I know you stopped for my kid when nobody else did." He glanced over his shoulder. "You coming or not?" His apartment was on the 4th floor of a building on Dunmore Street that had a broken elevator, under maintenance since May, according to the paper sign that had been taped to the elevator door so long it had yellowed at the corners, and hallways that smelled faintly of someone else's cooking no matter what time of day you passed through them. It wasn't a bad building. It was an honest building, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors through the walls and you learned their schedules whether you wanted to or not. The couple in 4B who argued every Thursday and made up every Friday. The old man in 4D who watched the same 3 channels at the same volume every night. Ryan unlocked the door and pushed it open. He saw it the way he always did when he brought someone new into the space. The sudden awareness of everything at once. The small living room with the second-hand couch that Chloe had decided needed throw pillows and then covered in about 14 of them. The kitchen table that only had 3 working chairs because the 4th had a cracked leg that he kept meaning to fix. The drawings on the refrigerator, a new one every week from Chloe's art class, held up by magnets from places he'd never been. The small TV with the remote that only worked if you pointed it at a very specific angle. It was clean. He kept it clean. That was the one thing he was consistent about. But it was undeniably small and undeniably worn, and there was a stack of unopened mail on the counter that he'd been avoiding since last week that he suddenly wished was invisible. Victoria stepped inside and looked around. She didn't say anything. Didn't do the thing people sometimes did when they entered a place smaller than they were used to. The involuntary pause. The eyes doing a quick calculation. She just looked, the way you look at a place when you're trying to understand it. "Bathroom's down the hall," Ryan said, setting the grocery bags on the counter. "Chloe, shoes off." "Already off," Chloe said from behind him, already padding toward the hallway in her socks. "And don't run. The sound of running feet." "In the hallway." He exhaled, looked at Victoria. "You want to shower? You're soaked." She hesitated. "I have a spare towel," he said, pulling out the bread and putting it on the counter. "It's not like a hotel towel, but it's clean." "Yes," she said after a moment. "Please." "Thank you." He got her the towel. It was blue, a little frayed at one edge, perfectly functional, and pointed her toward the bathroom, and then he stood in his kitchen and did the mental math that he always had to do. What was in the fridge, what he'd just bought, what he could make that was actually a meal, and not just food assembled near each other. Pasta, he decided. He had pasta. He had a jar of marinara that wasn't opened yet. He had some Italian sausage in the freezer. He had bread. He could make garlic bread. Chloe would eat that without complaint. He started water boiling and was slicing the bread when he heard the bathroom door open and close, and then Chloe's voice from the hallway, apparently interrogating Victoria about whether she had any pets. Ryan listened to the answer. Victoria said she'd had a dog when she was a kid, a beagle named Winston who had been deeply convinced he was much larger than he was. Chloe made a delighted sound and immediately launched into the full documented history of her desire for a puppy and all the reasons her dad kept saying not yet, and why those reasons were, in her considered opinion, not very good reasons. Ryan stood at the stove and stirred the sauce and thought about nothing in particular. Dinner was not a formal affair. There were no candles. The table technically only seated 3 if you pushed the broken-legged chair up carefully and nobody leaned on it wrong. Ryan served the pasta in the mismatched bowls that had come from 2 different sets and he'd never cared enough to replace. And the garlic bread was a little more toasted than he'd intended because he'd been distracted watching the sauce. But Chloe was in the kind of chattering mood that only happened when everything aligned just right. Not too tired, not too hungry, slightly elevated by the minor drama of the scraped knee and the storm and the unexpected company, and she carried basically the entire conversation for the first 15 minutes without seeming to notice or care. She told Victoria about 2nd grade, about her best friend Lily, who had moved away in September and how they still did video calls on Sunday nights, about how she wanted to be a marine biologist or a pastry chef, she hadn't decided yet, and the difficulty of choosing between them, about the class hamster named Gerald, who had escaped his cage twice and hidden behind the bookshelf both times. Victoria asked questions at the right moments. Real questions. Not the filler kind adults used to seem engaged when they weren't. Ryan watched this without saying much. He ate his pasta and drank the glass of water he'd poured and occasionally handed Chloe a napkin when the sauce situation on her face reached a level requiring intervention. At some point, naturally, the conversation shifted. "Where do you live?" Chloe asked Victoria, with the blunt directness of a child who hadn't yet learned that some questions came with subtext. Victoria set down her fork. "Right now?" she said. "Nowhere, I guess." Chloe considered this. "Like you're between places?" "Something like that." "Lily was between places for a month before they moved," Chloe said, with the gravity of someone referencing a significant period of history. "She stayed at her grandma's. Do you have a grandma?" "Chloe," Ryan said mildly. "I have parents," Victoria said. Her voice had shifted slightly. Not closed off exactly. More careful. Like someone stepping around something in the dark. "Where are they?" "They're—" She paused. She picked up her fork, put it down again. "They're looking for me, I think." Chloe absorbed this. "Why don't you want them to find you?" "Because sometimes," Victoria said slowly, "you need to figure out who you are without people telling you who you're supposed to be." Silence. Chloe tilted her head. "My dad says that sometimes you need quiet to hear yourself think," she offered. "Is that kind of like that?" Victoria looked at her. Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly, just for a second, but Ryan caught it. "Yeah," she said. "That's kind of like that." After dinner, Chloe wanted to watch a movie. This was non-negotiable. Friday nights, and this had become Friday night by technicality, in the way that hard days sometimes did, were movie nights. Ryan had approximately 0 energy to argue, and Victoria said she didn't mind, so they ended up on the couch with Chloe in the middle, blanket pulled over all 3 of them, with no one having consciously planned it that way. The movie was an animated one about a bear and his best friend who was a goose, and it was fine. It was a children's movie. Ryan had seen it 4 times. He knew every line. What he didn't know was how to feel about the fact that Chloe had leaned sideways into Victoria about 20 minutes in, the way she sometimes leaned into Ryan, the full-body lean of a child who'd decided you were safe. He waited for Victoria to adjust away, to subtly reposition. She didn't. She just pulled the blanket up slightly and kept watching the screen. Ryan looked at the ceiling for a moment. The heat in the apartment was slightly too warm, but he hadn't adjusted it because Chloe had been cold earlier. The rain was still hitting the window. The old man in 4D had his TV going, something with a laugh track, just barely audible through the wall. By the time the credits rolled, Chloe was asleep. She'd gone down in stages, the slow blink, the head getting heavier, the eventual full surrender. And she was now entirely unconscious and half-draped across Victoria's lap, with absolutely no regard for the fact that Victoria was a stranger they'd met 2 hours ago. Ryan reached over and gently lifted her. "I've got her," he said quietly. Victoria held still while he gathered Chloe into his arms. Chloe stirred, made a sound, settled. He carried her to her room and tucked her in, shoes already off, thankfully, and stood in the doorway for a moment in the way he always did, just checking, just making sure she was actually down and not going to appear in the hallway asking for water in the next 30 seconds. She was out. He went back to the living room. Victoria was sitting in the same spot, the blanket still across her lap, looking at nothing in particular. The TV was off now, and the room was quiet except for the rain and the distant laugh track. "I can pull the cushions off and flatten it out," Ryan said, nodding toward the couch. "I've got an extra blanket. It's fine," she said. "I mean it. It's better than fine." He looked at her. "You want to tell me what's actually going on?" he said. Not an accusation, genuinely asking. She looked at him for a long moment. "Not tonight," she said. He thought about pushing. He didn't. "Okay." He went to the closet and got the extra blanket, the heavy one, the green one with the small hole in the corner that he'd been meaning to sew up for 8 months, and brought it back and set it on the arm of the couch. "Bathroom's free. If you need anything, I'm the last door on the left." "Ryan." He stopped. "Why did you invite me in?" she asked. "Really?" He thought about it. He wasn't the kind of person who had prepared answers for things like this. "I don't know," he said finally. "You stopped. When everyone else kept walking, you stopped." He shrugged slightly. "Felt like the right thing to do." She held his gaze for a moment longer than was comfortable. "Thank you," she said. And it was different from the thank you outside the grocery store. That one had been reflexive, a social mechanism. This one was deliberate, like she meant it to land. "Get some sleep," he said, and went to his room. He didn't sleep well. He rarely did. His brain was the kind that stayed on after his body was ready to quit, running through the numbers. Rent was due in 8 days. The van's back left tire was going soft. Chloe had a dentist appointment he needed to reschedule because he hadn't been able to get the time off. And tonight, it had the added noise of a stranger in his living room to work with. He lay in the dark and stared at the water stain on the ceiling, shaped vaguely like a duck or a boot, depending on the light, and thought about the way Victoria had looked at Chloe during dinner. Not the polite attention of someone performing interest. Something more genuine and more complicated, like someone watching something they'd forgotten was possible. He didn't know anything about her. That was the rational thing to be concerned about, and he knew it. He had a daughter asleep in the next room and a stranger on his couch, and he knew nothing concrete. Not her full name, not where she'd come from, not why she had nowhere to be. But he'd spent enough time in enough places watching enough people to have developed a sense. The kind that wasn't foolproof, but was honest. And what his sense was telling him was that Victoria was not dangerous. She was damaged. There was a difference. He'd seen dangerous. Dangerous was a specific thing, a specific quality in the eyes and the posture, a certain orientation toward the world. Victoria wasn't that. What she was someone who had been somewhere very hard for a long time and was standing in the aftermath of it without knowing quite what to do with herself. He recognized that. He rolled over, closed his eyes. Thought about the way she'd said, sometimes you need to figure out who you are without people telling you who you're supposed to be. Like she was speaking from inside something specific. He was up at 6, habit, older than consciousness. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it was only very early in the morning, before the building started its daily soundtrack of doors and footsteps and other people's lives. He padded to the kitchen in socks and started the coffee machine on autopilot, and he was reaching for the mugs when he realized the couch was empty. The blanket was folded, not just pushed aside, folded, corners aligned, placed neatly on the cushion. He stood there for a second with both mugs in his hands. Then he heard something from outside. The window over the kitchen sink faced the narrow alley between their building and the next, and from the corner of it, he could just see the small fire escape landing where, occasionally, in summer, he sat in the evenings with a beer when he needed 5 minutes of something close to quiet. Victoria was out there, sitting on the metal steps with her knees pulled up and both hands wrapped around something. She'd found a mug, the one with the chip on the rim that he kept because Chloe had painted his name on the side of it in kindergarten. And she had coffee, which meant she'd been up before him and figured out the machine. She wasn't doing anything, just sitting, looking at the alley or the sliver of gray morning sky above it. Ryan poured his own coffee. He looked at the fire escape door, looked at his mug, looked at the folded blanket on the couch. He opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit immediately. Late October at 6 in the morning was not mild, and he made an involuntary sound. Victoria glanced over. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to use your mug." "It's fine." He lowered himself onto the step beside her, pulling his own legs up slightly. The grating was cold through his socks. "You sleep at all?" "Some." They sat for a moment in the gray quiet. The alley below had a dumpster and a fire hydrant and a single scraggly tree that had lost most of its leaves but was holding on to a few orange ones with grim determination. Somewhere a few blocks over, the city was already starting. A distant siren, the first bus of the morning, someone's car alarm doing its brief, pointless cry. "I haven't sat outside in the morning in a long time," Victoria said. Not to him exactly, just out loud. "You're more of a penthouse indoor morning person, I'm guessing," Ryan said. She looked at him sharply. He kept his eyes on the alley. "I just mean, you look like someone who hasn't been outside in a while. The general sense of someone who's been inside a lot. A lot of offices, maybe. A lot of rooms where people expect things from you." A silence. "You're more perceptive than you let on," she said. "I drive a van for 12 hours a day," he said. "You get good at reading people out of boredom." He sipped his coffee. "Or desperation." She almost smiled. He caught the edge of it before it disappeared. "How long have you been a single dad?" she asked. 5 years. "Chloe's mom. Gone." He said it simply. She left when Chloe was 2. Before that, actually. She was gone before she was physically gone. You know how that is. Victoria was quiet. "I don't blame her," he added, which was only partially true but had become mostly true over the years. It wasn't the life she wanted. The problem is, it's the life Chloe got, and that's the part that's hard to make peace with. He wasn't sure why he'd said that. He didn't usually say that. "She seems incredible," Victoria said. "She is." He said it without qualification. "She's the best person I know. 7 years old, and she has more genuine kindness in her than most adults I've met in my entire life." He paused. "She stopped you from walking away last night." "I know. I was going to let you." Victoria looked at him. "Not proudly," he said. "I was just tired, and I wasn't sure how to—" He exhaled. "But she asked you in, and somehow that made it simpler." "How?" He thought about it. "Because she was right," he said. "And she's usually right about that kind of thing. Who to trust?" He turned his head, finally looking at her directly. "Are you in trouble?" The word landed carefully. Victoria looked down at the mug in her hands, the chip on the rim, his name painted in a child's uneven letters in green and yellow. "Not the kind you're thinking," she said. "Nobody is. There's nobody going to come looking for me and cause problems for you. I'm not running from anything dangerous." "But you are running." "Yes." "From who?" She was quiet for a long moment. "My life," she said finally. He waited. "I have a life," she said, and the construction of the sentence was slightly wrong, like she was still deciding which tense was accurate. "A very successful, very full, very—" She stopped. "I walked away from it 6 months ago. I've been—" She looked at the scraggly tree. "Moving around, staying places, trying to figure out if it's the life I actually want or just the life I fell into because I was good at it. And still working on it." Ryan nodded slowly. "And your family," he said, "the people looking for you. They don't understand that you can miss people and still need to be away from them." Her voice had gone slightly flat. "My father especially, he thinks everything is a problem to be solved. Everything is a return on investment." She pressed her lips together briefly. "He loves me. I know he loves me. That's not the question. The question is whether being loved is the same as being seen." Silence. The city got a little louder around them. A pigeon landed on the dumpster below, looked around with the suspicious competence of a pigeon, and flew off. "I know a little about that," Ryan said carefully. She looked at him. "The not being seen thing," he said, "although mine's about being invisible in the opposite direction. More Nobody notices the guy delivering their packages. I'm scenery, furniture with a van. He paused. You were invisible last night because you wanted to be. I'm invisible because most people just don't look. That's lonelier, she said quietly. Sometimes. He stood, joints protesting the cold. Come inside. I'll make eggs. Chloe's going to be up in an hour and she's going to want pancakes, and I'm going to have to negotiate her down to eggs, and I could use someone to back me up. She looked up at him. He offered a hand. She took it and stood. He made the eggs. And then Chloe appeared from her room with her hair aggressively sideways and one sock on, and asked, with no preamble, if Victoria had stayed. When Victoria said yes and good morning, Chloe's face did the full sun smile she reserved for things that were exactly what she'd hoped for. Ryan made toast. He burned one piece. He scraped it over the sink. Victoria sat at the kitchen table and watched Chloe attempt to draw a picture of Gerald the class hamster while simultaneously eating scrambled eggs, which resulted in a smear of egg on the drawing, which she declared she would incorporate. And outside, the storm from the night before had cleared. The October sky was pale and raw and completely open, the kind of sky that came after a hard rain, washed clean of everything that had been there before. Ryan stood at the window for a moment with his coffee. He didn't know what was happening. He didn't know what the day was going to bring, or the day after that, or any of the days that were already lined up behind them with their own demands and emergencies and unexpected complications. But right now, in his small kitchen, there was coffee and toast, and his daughter drawing a hamster portrait, and a stranger who had stopped in the rain. He turned away from the window. "You're burning your toast," Victoria said, without looking up from whatever Chloe was telling her. Ryan turned back. He was in fact burning the toast. He grabbed it, scraped it, ate it anyway. The burned toast became a kind of running joke by mid-morning. Chloe had witnessed the scraping, declared it basically charcoal daddy, and Victoria had made a sound that was definitely a laugh this time, short and surprised, like it had gotten out before she could stop it. Ryan had eaten the toast anyway, on principle, and Chloe had watched him do it with the solemn fascination of someone observing an act of mild self-destruction. That had been Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, something had shifted in the apartment in a way that Ryan couldn't quite name and wasn't sure he should examine too closely. It wasn't dramatic. Nothing dramatic happened. Victoria helped Chloe finish the hamster drawing, contributing what Chloe described as professional quality ears, and Ryan went to the corner laundromat 2 blocks over to deal with a week's worth of clothes he'd been putting off. And when he came back, Chloe was in the middle of teaching Victoria the rules of a card game she had invented herself, which meant the rules changed every 3 minutes and were only clarified when Chloe was losing. "That's not a rule," Victoria was saying when Ryan pushed the door open with his laundry bag. "It is now," Chloe said firmly. "I just made it." "You can't make rules in the middle of a turn." "Why not?" "Because that's not how rules work." "My game, my rules." Victoria looked up at Ryan with an expression that said, "Help me." "And also, this is the most entertained I have been in months." Ryan dropped the laundry bag. "She does this every time," he said. "Don't engage with the logic. You'll lose." "I already lost," Victoria said. "She changed the win condition 3 times. "Yeah, that's advanced Chloe rules. You started on hard mode." Chloe looked deeply satisfied. Ryan made sandwiches for lunch. He'd bought a better bread at the grocery store the night before, not the value loaf, the actual bread. And he had turkey and mustard and a tomato that was just on the right side of still good. And he stood at the counter and made 3 sandwiches with the slightly excessive focus of someone who was trying not to think too hard about the overall situation. Victoria was staying another night. Nobody had said this directly. It had just become apparent, the way things did when a person was already in your space, and the alternative of them leaving into the cold with nowhere to go was a thing you could imagine clearly enough that the not doing it felt deliberate. He'd asked, over the card game, obliquely, "You need to get anywhere today?" And she'd said no, and that had been the whole conversation. He wasn't second-guessing it. He was just aware of it. The way you're aware of a new piece of furniture in a room, how you keep almost walking into it until your muscle memory updates. She was careful. That was what he kept noticing. Careful in the way she moved through his space. Not timid, not cautious exactly, but considerate. She didn't open cabinets without asking first. She left the bathroom exactly as she'd found it. She kept her small bag. She had one bag, which he'd noticed last night, a canvas shoulder bag with a tear at one strap, in the corner by the couch rather than spreading out, careful like someone who'd been in situations where taking up too much space had consequences. He brought the sandwiches to the table and sat down and didn't ask about that. The afternoon went slowly, which was the good kind of slow, the kind that meant nobody was in crisis and nothing was on fire. Chloe eventually abandoned the card game in favor of a jigsaw puzzle she'd been working on for 2 weeks, a 500-piece landscape of a national park that was currently about 60% complete and missing, she reported gravely. At least 4 sky pieces that I think might have fallen under the couch. Victoria got down on the floor to check under the couch. She found 2 puzzle pieces, 1 crayon, a rubber band, and a small plastic dinosaur that Chloe accepted back with the casual acknowledgement of someone reuniting with something they'd written off as lost. Ryan sat on the couch above them and half watched a football game with the volume low and mostly watched the puzzle get assembled. Chloe narrated constantly. The park and the puzzle was in Colorado, she explained. She wanted to go to Colorado someday. Her dad had said maybe for her 10th birthday, which was 3 years away, which was, in her assessment, basically 100 years from now. I've been to Colorado, Victoria said, fitting a sky piece into place. Chloe looked up with intense interest. What's it like? Mountains, Victoria said. Really big ones. The kind that make you feel small in a good way. What's a good way to feel small? Victoria paused. Like the world is bigger than your problems. Chloe considered this with genuine seriousness. That sounds nice, she decided. Ryan kept his eyes on the football game he wasn't watching. By evening, the day had settled into the particular rhythm of a household that had quietly accepted an addition. Not without friction, just without drama. Ryan made pasta again, because it was what he had, and Chloe declared it her favorite 2 nights in a row, which wasn't true, but was kind. And Victoria set the table without being asked, which she'd done the night before too, and Ryan noticed but didn't comment. They were in the middle of dinner when Victoria laughed, fully this time. Not the surprised edge of a laugh from the morning. An actual laugh, at something Chloe said about Gerald the hamster attempting to eat a pencil, and it was, Ryan had no better word for it, unexpected in the way that any real sound from a person who'd been careful and contained suddenly bursting through is unexpected. Chloe looked delighted, like she'd accomplished something. See, Daddy, she said, pointing her fork at Victoria. She thinks it's funny. I never said it wasn't funny, Ryan said. You said Gerald's escape attempts were a classroom management problem. That's also true. Both things can be true. Gerald is a hero, Chloe said firmly. Gerald is a hamster who ate a pencil. Victoria was still smiling. It changed her face, not in the obvious way people described, like lighting up or transforming, just that the careful quality eased slightly, like a fist that had been held closed for a long time, opening just part way. After dinner, Chloe asked for the movie again. Ryan put on a different one, still animated, still something Chloe had seen enough times that she knew the dialogue. And they ended up on the couch in roughly the same configuration as the night before, though this time it happened more consciously. Chloe climbed in between them with the deliberateness of a 7-year-old who knew exactly what she was doing and had decided this was correct. Ryan looked over her head at Victoria. Victoria looked back. Neither of them said anything. Chloe pulled the blanket up. It was about 40 minutes into the movie when Chloe asked, in the specific half-asleep murmur of a child going under, Victoria, are you staying tomorrow too? Silence. Ryan kept his eyes on the screen. We'll see, Victoria said softly. Chloe hummed, satisfied enough by this non-answer to accept it and continue her journey toward unconsciousness. Within 10 minutes, she was fully asleep, the heavy, settled sleep of a child who had decided the night was good and safe and complete. Ryan looked at the ceiling, the laugh track from 4D. The rain had stopped yesterday, but the street still sounded slightly wet when cars passed. A dog barking somewhere, 2 streets over, 3 quick barks, and then nothing. She's going to miss you, he said quietly. Not an accusation, just a fact he was filing out loud. I know, Victoria said. I'm not saying that to... I know, she said again. I'm not going to just disappear on her. I wouldn't do that. He nodded, looked at the screen. You have to go back eventually, he said. I know that too. To whatever it is you're running from. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not running from it anymore, I don't think, she said carefully. I think I'm just not ready to run back toward it yet. What's the difference? One is fear, she said. The other is choice. He thought about that. Fair enough, he said. The movie played. Outside, the city made its ordinary sounds. Chloe slept. And Ryan let the question he'd been turning over since this morning, what exactly is she not telling me, sit unanswered for another night, because some things moved at their own pace, and pushing them only made them close up tighter. He'd learned that from Chloe, actually. His 7-year-old had better instincts about it than he did. Mama. Sunday moved different from Saturday. Ryan had one delivery run in the morning, 4 hours, not a full shift, and he'd arranged for their neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, in 4A, to listen out for Chloe, which was the arrangement they had on weekend mornings when the routes couldn't wait. Mrs. Okafor was 63, retired, had the kind of firm warmth that made children and anxious adults alike feel immediately managed. And she had a particular fondness for Chloe that expressed itself in the offering of specific biscuits that she made herself, and that Chloe considered only slightly less important than oxygen. Before he left, Ryan knocked softly on the bedroom door. Chloe was still asleep, and then went to the living room where Victoria was awake on the couch, the blanket around her shoulders, looking at her phone with the look of someone who had opened it, found something, and was trying to decide what to do about it. She turned it face down when she heard him. He didn't push. I have a run, he said, pulling his jacket off the hook. 4 hours, maybe less. Mrs. Okafor next door is going to... I'll stay, Victoria said. If that's okay. Until you're back. He looked at her. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She met his gaze evenly. I want to. Chloe shouldn't wake up alone. Something in that sentence landed with more weight than she'd probably intended. Ryan zipped his jacket. Okay, he said. She likes her eggs scrambled. Don't make the toast too dark. Noted. He left. He spent the 4 hours of the route being more distracted than he'd been in months, which was saying something, because his baseline level of distraction was already high. The van, the numbers, the ongoing logistics of a life that required constant management. But this was different. This was the kind of distraction that kept pulling his attention to a single point, like a splinter under the skin. He was driving a stranger around his life. Not literally. But she was in his apartment with his daughter, and she was someone he'd known for approximately 36 hours, and he still didn't have her last name, and she'd turned her phone face down when he walked in, and the most he knew about her actual situation was that her family was looking for her, and she had been running for 6 months. This was not a thing he would have advised anyone else to do. He knew that. He also knew that Chloe trusted her, and that his daughter had, in 5 years of growing up, developed an accuracy rate about people that was frankly irritating to his adult skepticism. She had disliked exactly 2 people in her life on instinct, and on both occasions had turned out to be right. She had liked dozens of others and been right about all of them too. He pulled up to the last drop of the morning, a furniture warehouse on the industrial end of Clement, and sat in the van for a second after he cut the engine. He looked at his phone. Then he put it back in his pocket and got out. Some things, he figured, you just had to let move at their own pace. When he got back to the apartment at 11:30, he could hear Chloe before he opened the door. Not crying, not yelling, singing. Specifically, she was singing a song from the animated movie they'd watched last night, slightly off-key in the way that was exclusively Chloe's, the way that made you want to smile even if the pitch was doing things to the key signature. He stood outside the door for a moment and listened. Then he heard Victoria's voice join in, equally off-key, which made Chloe shriek with laughter and then sing louder. Ryan unlocked the door. The kitchen was a moderate disaster. Not a bad disaster. Not the kind that suggested something had gone wrong. More the kind that suggested something had gone very right and the cleanup had not yet happened. There was flour on the counter, some on the floor. The mixing bowl had batter on its rim and also on the exterior, which suggested an enthusiastic stirring situation. 3 pancakes were stacked on a plate on the table. One more was in the pan on the stove, where Victoria was standing with a spatula, watching it with the concentration of someone who had recently made mistakes with pancakes and was not going to repeat them. Chloe was covered in flour, not slightly, extensively. "Daddy," she announced, turning around and displaying herself with full pride. "We made pancakes." "I can see that." He looked at Victoria. "I thought you were supervising." "I was," Victoria said, without turning from the pan. "This is what supervised looks like." "She helped," Chloe said firmly. "She is covered in flour too." Victoria was, in fact, slightly covered in flour. Ryan took off his jacket. He sat down at the table. He pulled the plate of pancakes toward him. "These any good?" he asked. "They are exceptional," Chloe told him. "Who made them?" "We both made them." Chloe climbed into her chair. "I did the mixing, and Victoria did the pouring, and we did the flipping together." "The first one didn't work out," Victoria said, sliding the pan off the heat and adding the finished pancake to a second plate. "We agreed not to discuss the first one." "The first one was bad," Chloe told Ryan immediately. "We said, it was very bad, Daddy. It was flat and wrong." Chloe. "But the rest were good," Chloe added, at full volume, as a concession to diplomacy. Ryan ate the pancakes. They were, in fact, good. Real ones, the thick kind that held their shape, not the thin, sorry ones that resulted from wrong ratios or wrong heat. He ate two and watched Chloe eat one in about 6 separate bites because she kept getting distracted talking. And Victoria sat across from him with her own plate and her coffee, and something about her looked different from this morning. Less braced, that was the only word he had for it. Like a person who had been waiting for something bad to happen, and the waiting had gotten slightly tired. He didn't ask about the phone. He cleaned up the kitchen while Chloe showered, and Victoria sat at the table with her coffee and her thoughts. And at one point, she picked up a crayon from the collection Chloe had left on the table. They were always on the table, being slowly redistributed throughout the apartment, and turned it over in her fingers without seeming to know she was doing it. Red crayon. She kept turning it. "You said your dad was looking for you," Ryan said, not looking up from the dishes. "Yes." "He know you were in the city?" "He knows I started in the city 6 months ago." She set the crayon down. "He has resources. He's probably narrowed it down." "How close is he to finding you?" "A beat." "Probably close," she said. "I looked at my phone this morning." "And?" "There were 17 missed calls." Her voice had gone careful again. "And a message from my sister saying that he wasn't well, that the stress was—" She stopped. "She does that. Uses his health as the thing to say when she wants me to come back." "Is it true? About his health?" "I don't know." She picked up the crayon again. "Maybe. He's not young. He pushes himself hard." She looked at the table. "He pushes everyone hard." Ryan rinsed a bowl. "What does he do?" he asked. "Your father." "Investments," she said. "Private equity. He built it from money, to be honest. He had money to start with, but he turned it into something different, something much larger." She paused. "I took it further, expanded internationally, added an investment arm focused on infrastructure development." She said it flatly, like reciting from a document. "On paper, I'm very successful." "And off paper?" She was quiet. "Off paper," she said finally, "I hadn't taken a day off in 4 years. I had this office, floor-to-ceiling windows, 42nd floor. You could see the whole city on a clear day. And I sat in that office one morning in March, and I looked at my calendar, and every single day for the next 3 months was already full. Every day. Meetings, events, negotiations, board calls. Not one open day. Not one." She set the crayon down with a small, precise click. "And I thought, I can't do this. And then I thought, I don't know if I even want to do this. And I didn't know which thought scared me more." Ryan turned off the tap. He turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at her. "So you walked out," he said. "I walked out," she confirmed. "I told my assistant I was going to lunch. I didn't come back." A short pause. "She called me 11 times that afternoon." "What did you tell her?" "That I was okay. That I needed time." She looked down at her hands. "She's still calling. Most of them are still calling. My whole life is apparently incapable of pausing without me in it. That sounds like a problem they created, Ryan said carefully. Victoria looked up. What do you mean? I mean, a thing that can't function without one person isn't a system. It's a dependency. He shrugged. I don't know your world, but that sounds like they built something that required you to be always on. And that's not the same as you being irreplaceable. That's them being unwilling to build something that could stand on its own. She stared at him. Sorry, he said. I'm a delivery driver, not a... No, she said. You're right. She said it slowly, like turning a key in a lock that had been stiff for a long time. You're absolutely right. And somehow in 6 months of thinking about it, nobody has said it that directly. He turned back to the dishes. Chloe talks too much, he said. So I learned to be direct. It's the only way to get a sentence in. From the hallway, Chloe's voice. I heard that. Sunday afternoon carried the particular quiet weight of a day that knows it's the last one before something. Ryan felt it without naming it, the way the light came through the window at a lower angle now, the city sound slightly muted, everything a half step slower than Saturday had been. He did some paperwork at the kitchen table. Route logs, invoices, the specific tedium of being self-contracted that required documentation for everything. Chloe drew. Victoria read. She'd found a paperback on the small shelf beside the TV, a thriller Ryan had bought at an airport 3 years ago and never finished, and she'd asked if it was okay to borrow it. And he'd said, of course. And now she was 70 pages in and making the occasional small sound that suggested the thriller was doing its job. It was aggressively domestic. Ryan was aware of this. He was also aware that tomorrow was Monday, and he had a full route starting at 5:30, and Chloe had school, and the ordinary machinery of their life was going to turn back on whether or not any of this had resolved itself. Victoria would either still be here, or she wouldn't. The question was quietly present in the room all afternoon, unspoken. At some point, Chloe looked up from her drawing and said to Victoria, Do you know how to braid hair? I do, yeah. Mine? Victoria looked at Ryan. He gestured, Go ahead. Chloe repositioned herself on the carpet in front of where Victoria was sitting on the couch, and Victoria set the book aside and worked through the tangles first with patient fingers. And Chloe winced twice and said ow in a tone that communicated betrayal each time. And Victoria said sorry, almost got it with the practiced patience of someone who had done this before or had thought carefully about how to do it. And Ryan watched from the table and then looked at his paperwork and then looked back again. My mom used to do this, Chloe said, in the conversational tone she used when she mentioned her mother, which was rare but not never. Before she left, Ryan went still. Do you remember her? Victoria asked, her voice the same even tone. A little. She had long hair. She smelled like something, I can't remember what. Chloe turned her head slightly, then corrected when Victoria redirected it. Daddy says I can look her up when I'm older if I want. That sounds like a good plan. I don't know if I want to, Chloe said, with the simple clarity of a child examining a feeling without coding it in anything. I don't know if I'm mad at her or just neutral. Is that bad? No, Victoria said quietly. I think neutral is honest. Are you neutral about your dad? A pause. Ryan held very still. No, Victoria said, I'm not neutral about him. It's complicated. I love him, and I'm also angry at him, and I also think some of what he does comes from fear, and that makes it complicated to be angry at. What's he afraid of? Losing control of things. The words came out like she'd thought them many times before. People like him, they build things because they're afraid of not having enough, and then they keep building because the fear doesn't go away when you have enough. It just finds a new shape. Chloe was quiet, absorbing this. That sounds exhausting, she said finally. It is, Victoria said, for him and for everyone around him. Ryan looked at his invoice sheet. He'd written the same number twice. He erased one. Outside, evening was starting its slow roll across the city. He made grilled cheese for dinner because it was Sunday and he was tired, and grilled cheese was the honest answer to Sunday tired. Chloe had hers with tomato soup, the canned kind, the one with the red label, the one that apparently had no acceptable substitute. and ate it with the satisfaction of someone for whom this meal hit exactly the right note. Victoria ate hers and said it was good, and meant it in the way you can tell someone means something rather than filling space. After dinner, Chloe brushed her teeth and came back to the living room to say goodnight, and she hugged Ryan first, and then she hugged Victoria with the full-body commitment she used for people she'd decided were fully hers. And Victoria held on for a second longer than the expected duration, and Ryan looked at the wall. When Chloe was in bed, the apartment felt different, smaller and also larger, both at once, the way spaces do when the most energetic presence in them withdraws. Ryan sat on the couch. Victoria sat on the other end of it with the book, but she wasn't reading. He'd been turning something over all day, and he made the decision to say it now rather than let it stay unspoken. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Okay. And I want you to know you don't have to answer." "Ryan." "What?" "Just ask." He exhaled. "Your family. The people looking for you." He turned to look at her directly. "Who are they exactly? Not names. I mean, what world are they in?" She held the closed book in her lap. "Why?" "Because you've been careful," he said. "Careful about what you say, and careful about how much space you take up, and careful not to let anything specific out. And I'm not asking you to stop being careful, but I've got a kid in there, and I made the call to invite you in, and I'd rather know what shape the thing is that I can't see than keep guessing." She was quiet for a moment. "They're not dangerous," she said. "Not to you, not to Chloe." She paused. "They're just large. My father's name is Edward Sterling, if that means anything to you." Ryan thought about it. "Sterling Capital?" he said. "Sterling Capital Group, yes." He processed this slowly. Sterling Capital Group was not a thing you didn't know about if you'd watched any business news in the last decade. It was the kind of name that showed up alongside words like acquisition and billion, and once, memorably, in a headline about a Senate hearing that Ryan had read about on his phone between deliveries. He looked at her. She met his gaze without looking away. "You're," he started. "Victoria Sterling," she said. "Yes." "That's," he stopped, reorganized. "Okay." "Okay? I mean," he exhaled through his nose. "That's more than I expected." "I know. But it doesn't," he stopped again, making sure the words were the right ones. "It doesn't change anything about what happened last 2 days. You're still the person who stopped for Chloe. That's still the thing that started this." She looked at him like she wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. "Most people," she said carefully, "when they find out—" "Change," he said. "Yeah, I imagine they do." He looked at his hands. "I'm a delivery driver, Victoria. I literally carry things from one place to another for a living. I don't have a version of this situation where knowing your net worth changes anything for me, because there's no—" He shook his head. "There's no angle. There's nothing to gain. People always find angles. I know I'm not people. I'm just a tired guy with a couch and a kid who trusts people faster than I do." He looked up. "You're going to have to deal with your father eventually. I think you know that." "I know. And I think—" He chose the words carefully. "Whatever it is he's built that relies on you being always on, always available, you're going to have to walk back into it and either change it or leave it for real. The in-between is—" He gestured at the small apartment. "It can't stay like this, the in-between place." She looked at the book in her lap. "No," she said quietly. "It can't." The building made its sounds. The old man in 4D, the couple in 4B, quiet tonight. "Thank you," Victoria said, "for not making it weird when I told you." "I'm trying very hard not to make it weird," he admitted. She almost smiled again. It was almost, and then it wasn't quite, and then it actually was. Small and tired and real. The kind of smile that doesn't ask to be noticed, and so gets noticed more. Ryan looked at the dark TV screen. "You should sleep," he said. "I've got a 5:30 start." "I will." He got up. He was at the hallway when he heard her voice behind him, quiet and plain. "I don't know how to go back," she said. "I know I have to, but I don't know how to go back and be different in a place where everyone remembers who I was." He stopped, didn't turn around. "I don't know either," he said, "but I know you can't figure it out from a couch in someone else's apartment." He paused. You figure it out by going. She didn't answer. He went to his room. He lay in the dark with the water stain on the ceiling and the city outside, and the knowledge that the morning was coming whether or not anything had gotten resolved, and that was the honest nature of mornings. They arrived regardless, already loaded with their own demands. He was asleep before he finished the thought. What woke him was not his alarm. It was the knock. 3 knocks, precisely, at the front door. Not aggressive, not apologetic. The kind of knock that expected to be answered. The kind of knock that had done this many times before and knew how to communicate authority through wood and distance. It was 7:48 in the morning. Ryan was in the kitchen, already up, coffee already made, Chloe's backpack already by the door. He'd heard Victoria in the shower and was giving her the kitchen while he double-checked Chloe's lunch bag. When the knock came, he went to the door. He looked through the peephole. The hallway of the 4th floor of his building looked back at him, and in it stood 2 men in dark suits with the particular posture of people who spent most of their time in buildings with security desks and elevators that worked. Behind them, the hallway was too narrow to see much else, but there was a shape, a third person, slightly older, standing very still. Ryan pulled back from the peephole, looked at the kitchen, looked at the door. "Victoria," he said, not loudly. The shower had stopped a few minutes ago. She appeared in the hallway doorway, hair damp, Ryan's spare towel over her shoulders, Chloe's toothbrush mug in one hand because she'd been about to pour herself a coffee. She looked at his face. "What?" He nodded at the door. 3 more knocks. She went very still. She understood. "You don't have to," she started. He'd already opened the door. The men in the hallway were exactly what the peephole had suggested. Suits, controlled faces, the specific blankness of professional discretion. And behind them, taking a single step forward as the door opened, was a man in his late 60s with gray hair and the kind of face that had spent decades in rooms where people watched it carefully. He was looking past Ryan, directly at Victoria. Ryan stood in the doorway of his apartment and felt the full weight of the gap between his world and hers land on him all at once, not gradually, not in the careful increments of the last 2 days, but all at once, like stepping off a curb you hadn't seen. Chloe appeared beside him, backpack already on, looking up at the men in the hallway with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy," she said quietly. "Who are they?" Ryan put his hand on her shoulder. He didn't have an answer yet. In the hallway, the man who was looking at Victoria said, in a voice that was controlled and tired and something else underneath both of those things, "Victoria." 1 word, but it carried the weight of 6 months of silence, and in the apartment behind Ryan, he heard Victoria set down the coffee mug on the counter. The sound of it, small and deliberate and final, was the sound of an in-between place ending. The man in the hallway did not move. Edward Sterling had the stillness of someone who had learned, over a long career of negotiating things most people never got close to, that movement was a form of concession. You waited. You let the silence do the work. You let the other person feel the weight of it and respond to that weight, and in that response you learned everything you needed to know about them. He was doing that now, in the 4th floor hallway of a building on Dunmore Street, with 2 of his security detail behind him and his daughter standing in a stranger's apartment, holding a coffee mug with a chip in the rim. Ryan Hayes was not moving either, not out of strategy. Just because he genuinely wasn't sure what the correct move was, and when he didn't know, he'd learned to stay still and let the situation show him. It was Chloe who moved. She leaned slightly around Ryan's leg, studied the man in the hallway with the frank assessment of a 7-year-old who had not yet learned to be intimidated by expensive suits, and said, "You look like you've been really worried about someone." Edward Sterling blinked. It was a small thing, barely visible, but Ryan caught it. The blink and then the slight shift, the way a very controlled face does something involuntary when it encounters something it wasn't prepared for. He looked down at Chloe. "I have been," he said, and his voice, stripped of the corporate weight it had carried in the single word to Victoria, sounded tired, just tired. "She's okay," Chloe told him, with the confidence of a person delivering a report. "She slept on our couch. We made pancakes." Ryan put his hand gently on the top of Chloe's head, not to silence her, just grounding. He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in," he said. It was not a natural sentence to say. It was the hardest one in his limited options, but it was the only one that didn't feel wrong, and so he said it and stood aside, and Edward Sterling looked at him for the first time. Really looked. The way the man probably looked at everything, calculating and assessing, and then stepped through the door. The two men in suits stayed in the hallway. Ryan closed the door. The apartment, which had been small before, felt significantly smaller. Victoria had not moved from the kitchen doorway. She was still holding the chipped mug. She and her father looked at each other across a distance of maybe 15 feet that contained roughly 6 months of silence and whatever had been accumulating before that. Ryan took Chloe by the shoulder. "Hey," he said quietly, steering her toward the hallway. "Get your jacket. I'll walk you to the bus." "But—" "Jacket," he said. Chloe looked between Victoria and the older man with the expression of a child who understood that something adult was happening and hadn't yet decided whether to respect or resist this. She went for her jacket. Small mercies. Ryan stood in the kitchen area, which put him equidistant between them and also close enough to the counter that he could pretend he was getting coffee if he needed a reason to be where he was. "Victoria," her father said again. A different inflection this time. Less weight, more something raw underneath, something that a man like Edward Sterling had probably spent 68 years learning to code in other things and was having difficulty coding right now. "Dad," she said. One word from each of them, and the whole shape of the relationship was in it. 6 months, he said. "I know how long it's been. Your sister thought—" He stopped, collected himself visibly, like a man picking up papers he'd dropped and trying to look like he'd meant to put them on the floor. "There were people who thought something had happened to you. I called. I messaged. I told you I was okay. You told me you needed space." The word came out with the slight sharpness of a man who found the concept faintly incomprehensible. "I don't know what that means, Victoria. I don't know how to—" He looked at the apartment, at the refrigerator with the drawings on it, at the mismatched bowls still in the dish rack. "I don't know how to sit with that." "I know you don't," she said quietly. "That's part of the problem." Ryan took a small silent step backward. He was not supposed to be part of this conversation. He was very aware of this. He was a stage that this conversation was happening on, and the professional thing, the decent thing, was to be as invisible as a stage could be. But his kitchen was 11 feet wide. There was a limit to the invisible. "Daddy?" Chloe said, appearing from the hallway with her jacket on and her backpack properly settled on both shoulders in the way she only did when she was trying to show she was being responsible. "I'm ready." "Good." He grabbed his own jacket from the hook. He looked at Victoria. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. She nodded, just slightly. He took Chloe out. The door clicked shut behind them, and the hallway, despite the two large men standing in it, felt like a relief. "Who is that man?" Chloe asked as they went down the stairs. "Her father." "He seems scared," Chloe said. Ryan held the stairwell door. "Yeah? Not scared like a spider scared like—" She thought about it, one hand on the railing, taking the stairs with the deliberate care she'd maintained since the scraped knee. "Scared like when I lost you in the grocery store that one time and I couldn't find you and everything felt wrong." Ryan looked at her. "You remember that?" "I was 5, not a baby," she said with dignity. He pushed the front door of the building open. The Monday morning air hit them, cold and clear, the last traces of the weekend's rain still in the smell of the street. "Yeah," he said, "kind of like that." They walked the 3 blocks to the bus stop mostly in silence, which for Chloe meant she was genuinely processing something. She saved her silences for the big things, the way most people saved their noise. At the bus stop, she turned to him. "Is she going to leave?" she asked. Straight out, no build-up. He crouched down to her level. "Probably," he said, "not because she wants to, but because she has a life she needs to go back to." Chloe looked at the ground. "I know," she said. "I knew when she said we'll see last night. That means yes." Ryan looked at his daughter, 7 years old, and she read people like text. "You okay?" he asked. "I will be." She looked up. "She'll come back, though, not to stay. Just, she'll come back." "You don't know that." "I do." She said it with the same certainty she used for facts she'd learned at school. Not wishful thinking, conviction. "She likes it here. Not the apartment, us. She likes us." The bus came around the corner. Ryan stood up and kissed the top of her head. She accepted it with the tolerance of someone who had decided to allow it for now. And she got on the bus and turned to wave from the step before the doors closed, and then the bus pulled away, and he stood on the sidewalk with his hands in his jacket pockets. He stood there for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went back. The two men in suits were still in the hallway, which meant whatever was happening inside was still happening. Ryan nodded at them. They did not nod back. They were very committed to their blankness, and let himself in. Victoria and her father were sitting down. This was not what he had expected to find. He'd expected to find them standing as they'd been, the 15 feet of charged air between them, both of them holding their positions like it was tactical. But they were sitting, Victoria on the couch, Edward Sterling in the chair across from it, the one with the slightly repaired armrest that Ryan had fixed with wood glue 8 months ago. There were 2 mugs of coffee on the table. Victoria must have poured them. They weren't talking when he came in. But they'd been talking. He could feel the residue of it in the room, the way air felt different after people had been using it for something real. He went to the kitchen as quietly as he could manage, which in an apartment this size was not very quietly. "You don't have to disappear," Victoria said without turning around. He stopped. "I'm not trying to—" "You're trying to give us space," she said. "I appreciate it, but this is your home." She glanced back at him. "You can pour a coffee." He poured a coffee. He stood at the counter with it rather than sitting down, which was a compromise. Edward Sterling looked at him for the second time. The first time had been assessment. This time was something different. The look of a man recalibrating, taking in information and letting it update something. "You're the one who took her in," he said. "She had nowhere to be," Ryan said. "It was cold. She could have gone to a hotel." "She didn't. She has—" Edward stopped himself, looked at his coffee, the look of a man who had started a sentence about money and caught himself mid-reach. "She has resources. She didn't have to rely on a stranger's charity." "It wasn't charity," Ryan said. "It was a couch." Edward studied him. "You know who she is," he said. Not a question. "As of last night, yeah." "And you don't want anything." Ryan looked at the man evenly. "If I wanted something, I'd be sitting down," he said. "I'm standing in my kitchen drinking my coffee. That's about the extent of what I want right now." A silence. Edward Sterling looked at him for a long moment, and then something behind his expression shifted. It was subtle. The kind of shift that happened when a man who was used to understanding everyone's motive encountered something that didn't have an obvious one. He looked at Victoria. "Your mother wants to come," he said. "I told her to let me come first." "Why?" "Because she would have cried on the phone, and you would have come home to make it stop, and that's not—" He exhaled. "That's not the right reason to come home." Victoria looked at her father. Ryan watched her look at him and watched the complicated machinery of it, the love that was present and the anger that was present and the exhaustion that was sitting on top of both of them like something heavy left on a shelf too long. "I needed to breathe," she said. "I know. No, you." She stopped. Reset. "You know it intellectually. You understand it as a concept, but you don't understand it in the way that—" She pressed her hands flat on her knees. "Every time I tried to take time, every vacation, every weekend, every hour that wasn't scheduled, you called, or someone called for you, or there was something that only I could handle. And eventually the vacation wasn't a vacation. The weekend wasn't a weekend. It was just the office without walls." Edward was quiet. "I didn't realize," he said. "You did realize," she said. Not unkind, just honest. "You realized and you told yourself it was necessary. There's a difference." He looked at his coffee. Ryan from the kitchen said nothing. It was the silence of a man hearing something he'd probably heard before and was only now hearing correctly, the specific silence of someone deciding whether to defend themselves or let the thing land. Ryan had had that silence too, in different contexts, smaller stakes. He recognized the shape of it. "You're right," Edward Sterling said. The words came out with visible difficulty. Not because he was dishonest, Ryan thought, but because they were the kind of words that required a man to set down something he'd been carrying for a long time, and the setting down was physically awkward even when it was right. Victoria looked at her father. "What?" she said, quietly. "You're right," he said again. He set his coffee mug on the table with a steadiness that suggested it was either very controlled or his hands weren't quite steady. I turned you into what I needed, what the company needed, and I told myself it was because you were capable, that it was a compliment. He paused. It was also not just that. The apartment was very quiet. Outside, the Monday morning city was going about its business with no awareness whatsoever of what was happening in a fourth-floor apartment on Dunmore Street. I missed you, Edward said. And this sentence, unlike the previous ones, came out stripped of all the architecture that money and authority built around a man over decades. Just the sentence. Just the fact. Not the CEO, not the investment director. You. My daughter who used to argue with me about everything and was right about half of it. Victoria's jaw moved. She looked at the wall. Ryan turned away and looked out the kitchen window, because some things were not his to witness straight on. The alley outside, the scraggly tree with its last few orange leaves, the fire escape where they'd sat Sunday morning with their coffee in the cold. He heard Victoria say roughly, "You could have just said that. Any time in the last 4 years, you could have just said that." "I know." Her father's voice was quieter now. "I know." The sounds after that were not words, and Ryan kept looking out the window, and the tree held its remaining leaves with that same grim determination, and the city went on. It took another hour. Ryan made himself useful in the limited ways available, refilled coffees, stayed out of the living room, answered a text from his dispatcher about tomorrow's route, sent Chloe a thumbs-up emoji when she messaged to say she'd gotten to school fine. He cleaned the bathroom, which needed it. He reorganized the cabinet under the sink that had been chaotic since approximately March. The conversation in the living room moved through phases that he could track by sound without hearing words. The tense phase, then the brittle phase, where someone said something that required the other person to recalibrate. Then a longer, quieter phase that had a different quality to it, less confrontational, more like two people trying to remember the shape of each other. When Edward Sterling emerged from the living room, he came to the kitchen. Ryan straightened. The older man stood at the edge of the kitchen, hands in his pockets, and looked at Ryan with an expression that had none of the assessment of earlier. It was more plain than that, more direct. "She told me what happened," he said. "Outside the grocery store, with your daughter." "It was nothing complicated," Ryan said. "She fell." Victoria stopped. "Most people didn't." "No," Ryan said, "they didn't." Edward was quiet for a moment. "My daughter has been—" He paused, choosing. "In her world, which is also the world I put her in, people stop for reasons. There's always a reason, a connection, an agenda, a social calculation." He looked at the refrigerator, at Chloe's drawings. A woman slipping in the rain and stopping for a child she didn't know. That doesn't happen in the room she spent the last 10 years in. "It happens everywhere," Ryan said carefully. "People stop all the time. You just don't notice it if you're not looking." "Maybe," Edward said. He looked at Ryan directly. "What do you want? From this situation? From her?" Ryan met his gaze. "I'm not in a situation," he said. "I was a couch for 2 nights. I don't have expectations past that. She's—" Edward started, and Ryan could see the familiar reflex assembling itself. The instinct to explain Victoria's value in quantifiable terms, to establish the parameters. And then the man stopped himself, visibly stopped himself. "She's important to me," he said instead, simply. "And you were kind to her when she needed it. I want to understand that." Ryan looked at him. "She was kind to my kid first," he said. "But that's the whole story. There's no more to understand." Edward Sterling looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. One nod, brief and complete, the kind that meant something had been registered and filed and would stay filed. He went back to the living room. Ryan exhaled through his nose and turned back to the counter. At some point, without him noticing the exact moment, the 2 men from the hallway had been told to wait downstairs. He heard Edward speak to them through the door. And the apartment became slightly less of a standoff and more of a place where people were just trying to figure something out. Victoria came to the kitchen around 11. She looked like someone who had been crying and was done crying and was now in the particular aftermath state of someone who had set something down that they'd been carrying for too long. Not light, but not bowed either. Just upright. Just herself. She leaned against the counter beside him. "He's going to call my mother," she said. "She'll want to talk. That'll take a while." "Okay. He's—" She paused. "He heard me." Which is— She looked at the refrigerator, at the drawings, the magnets from places Ryan had never been. It's not everything, but it's something. It's the first time in a very long time he actually heard me instead of— She didn't finish the sentence. Ryan nodded. "Are you going back?" he asked. "Yes." She said it without hesitation this time, which was different from last night. Last night it had been, "I have to go back." This was different. The difference between a thing being dragged toward you and a thing you turn to face. "Not today. He's going to give me—" He said 2 weeks. He said 2 weeks to figure out what I'm going back to. What I want it to look like. She looked at her hands. He's never said anything like that before in my entire life. Ryan was quiet. 2 weeks is not forever, he said. No. She almost smiled. But it's 2 weeks more than I had yesterday. He looked at the ceiling briefly. Victoria, he said. What are you doing in 2 weeks? She looked at him sideways. Specifically, he said, what are you going to do with 2 weeks? I don't know. Find somewhere to stay. Think. Try to figure out what the thing is that I actually want my life to look like rather than the shape I inherited. Do you have somewhere to stay? A pause. I was going to— There are hotels. You could stay here, he said. He said it to the counter rather than to her. The couch is not comfortable. I want to be honest about that. It's a mid-range couch from 7 years ago, and it's going to leave a mark on your back by day 3. And the elevator's been broken since May. And my neighbor in 4D watches television at the same volume every night until exactly 10:45 and then stops. He paused. But it's here. She was quiet. Ryan, I'm not— He turned his head to look at her. I'm not doing anything except offering a couch. Chloe's going to lose her mind, but that's not why I'm offering. He paused. I think you need somewhere that isn't a hotel. You need to be around a regular life for 2 weeks, real errands and bad coffee and a 7-year-old reorganizing your priorities whether you want her to or not. He paused again. I could also use the help with the toast. She looked at him. The chipped mug was still on the counter, his name in Chloe's uneven kindergarten letters, green and yellow. That's the worst sales pitch I've ever heard, she said. I'm a delivery driver, he said. I don't do sales. She pressed her lips together and looked at the mug. Okay, she said. He turned back to the counter. There's a Target 2 blocks from here, he said. You need clothes that aren't what you've been wearing. We can go after Chloe's school pickup. I have money, Ryan. I know you have money. I'm just telling you where the Target is. She was quiet for a second. Thank you, she said. You can stop saying that, he said. Every time you say it, it gets more awkward. Okay. A pause. Sorry. That's worse. She laughed. Not the surprised edge of it. The real one again. And this time he let himself hear it properly. The sound of it in his small kitchen, in his ordinary Monday morning, something that had no reason to be there and was there anyway. Her father appeared in the kitchen doorway, phone in hand, the expression of a man who had just finished a conversation that had cost him something and was settling the bill. Your mother wants to talk to you, he said to Victoria. Then he looked at Ryan. She's going to be here for a while. I know, Ryan said. Edward Sterling looked around the kitchen. The mismatched bowls, the drawings on the fridge, the chipped mug on the counter with a child's handwriting on it. I'll have someone bring her things, he said. Practical. Already pivoting to logistics, because that was how a man like him showed care, through solving the visible problems. Ryan understood this without approving or disapproving of it. It was just what it was. That's fine, Ryan said, and I'd like to— Edward paused. I'd like to come back before the 2 weeks are up, not to— He looked at Victoria. Not to rush, just to— Come for dinner, Victoria said. She said it before she'd finished deciding to. Ryan could see the surprise on her own face. Thursday. Come for dinner on Thursday. Her father blinked. Here? He said. Here, she said. A moment. Okay, Edward Sterling said. and he said it with a simplicity that was not the simplicity of a man who had won something, but the simplicity of a man who had found a door he hadn't known was there. He left an hour later. Ryan stood at the window and watched the black SUVs pull away from the curb below, the dark shapes of them moving through the ordinary traffic of Dunmore Street. Produced trucks and bike messengers, and a woman with a stroller and two men from an HVAC company unloading equipment, until they turned at the corner and were gone. He stood there for a while after. The street returned to itself. The scraggly tree in the alley held its last orange leaves. Behind him, Victoria was on the phone with her mother, her voice low and slightly unsteady in the way that voices got when they were dealing with the specific intimacy of a parent, and he gave her that privacy by staying at the window, watching the street, thinking about nothing in particular in the specific way that meant he was thinking about everything. 2 weeks. He had a Monday route in 5 hours. He had a dentist appointment for Chloe to reschedule. He had a van with a softback tire and a rent due in 8 days, and a cabinet under the sink that was now significantly more organized than it had been this morning. His life was the same life it had been on Friday. Except it wasn't. He knew that. He just didn't have the language for exactly what it was instead. The phone call from the other room went on. Somewhere in it, he heard Victoria say something that sounded like, "I know, Mom. I know. I'm okay. I'm actually okay." And then a pause, listening. And then something lower, softer, that he couldn't quite hear and wasn't trying to. The tree held its leaves. Ryan drank his cold coffee and waited for the street to tell him something. And the street said nothing, because streets never did. And that was the honest truth of ordinary life. It just kept moving, indifferent and continuous, and you moved with it, or you got left behind. And the trick was figuring out which forward was actually forward, and which was just motion. He still hadn't figured that out. He had a feeling the next 2 weeks weren't going to make it simpler. But when he heard Victoria's voice steady itself in the other room, the long exhale of someone who had been holding tension in their chest for 6 months finally releasing it incrementally, the slow letting out, not the sudden collapse, the careful kind, he thought that simpler wasn't necessarily the point. He went and poured himself a fresh coffee. He left the window. The day was already moving. The next 2 weeks did not move smoothly. Ryan had not expected them to, and the not expecting was the thing that kept him from being blindsided when they didn't. Life in a small apartment with an additional adult did not scale gracefully. The bathroom situation required a negotiated schedule by day 3, which Chloe drafted on a piece of notebook paper with color-coded time blocks and taped to the door with excessive tape, presenting it at breakfast with the authority of someone announcing legislation. Victoria had looked at it for a long moment and then said it was the most organized thing she'd seen in 6 months, which Chloe accepted as her due. The couch, as Ryan had warned, was doing what the couch did. By Wednesday morning, Victoria was stretching her back in the kitchen with the specific wincing of someone whose lumbar region had opinions, and Ryan had dug out the extra mattress topper from the top shelf of the closet. It had been up there since he'd replaced the bed 2 years ago, and dropped it on the couch without comment. And she'd said thank you, and he'd said stop saying that, and that was that. The Target run had happened Tuesday afternoon after school pickup. It had been a functional errand, mostly. Chloe had treated it as a personal mission, appointing herself Victoria's advisor with a seriousness of purpose that Ryan found both useful and mildly alarming. She had opinions about colors. Victoria looked good in dark green, she announced, because it matched her eyes, a detail Ryan had registered but not articulated, and firm positions on the unnecessary nature of anything dry clean only given the context of the apartment. "You live here now," Chloe had explained, standing in a Target clothing aisle with her arms crossed. "Dry clean only doesn't make sense." Victoria had looked at a blouse she'd been holding and put it back. She'd bought practical things: jeans, sweaters, a jacket that actually worked for the weather, 2 pairs of shoes. She'd paid at the register without taking out her wallet. She had a phone with a payment app, and the transaction was brief and quiet, and Ryan had deliberately not looked at the total because that felt like the right call. He drove them home. He made dinner. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and thought about the fact that this was Tuesday, and Thursday was dinner with Edward Sterling, and that the distance between those 2 points contained more potential for things to go sideways than he was entirely comfortable with. He'd agreed to Thursday dinner without fully thinking through what Thursday dinner meant. What it meant was Edward Sterling in his apartment, at his table, in the chair with the repaired armrest, eating food that Ryan made in a kitchen that was approximately 1/8 the size of whatever kitchen Edward Sterling normally ate in. He was not intimidated. He told himself this firmly on Wednesday morning while he was scraping his toast. He'd done it again, and Chloe had given him the look. And he mostly believed it. He was a little intimidated, not by the money or the name. That part he genuinely didn't care about, or had trained himself not to, or some combination of those two things that amounted to the same result. What he was intimidated by was the awareness that he was standing at the intersection of something he didn't have a map for. Victoria had been in his apartment for 3 days. She helped with dishes without being asked. She read on the fire escape every morning with her coffee regardless of the temperature, which had dropped to the high 40s, and Ryan had stopped mentioning the cold because she clearly knew she was cold and had made a decision about it. She and Chloe had developed a routine around homework. Chloe's second-grade homework was not complex, but she performed it with more focus when Victoria sat at the table across from her, both of them ostensibly doing their own work, Chloe glancing up occasionally as though checking that the structure was still there. Ryan noticed all of this from the periphery and let it be what it was and didn't push it into a shape he could label. He had enough to manage without labeling things. Wednesday's route ran long. An extra pickup in the industrial district, a redelivery on a package that had been refused, the back tire finally losing enough pressure that he had to stop at a service station and deal with it. And he got home at 7:15 to find that Victoria had made dinner. Not reheated anything. Made it. She'd found the chicken breasts in the fridge that he'd been planning to cook tomorrow, and the garlic and the lemon and the small bottle of white wine he kept on the counter that he used for cooking and occasionally for the end of a long day, and she'd made something with it that smelled significantly better than what he would have made with the same ingredients. Chloe was already at the table eating. She cooked, Chloe reported, as Ryan stood in the doorway in his jacket. I see that. It's good. I can tell from here. You should take your jacket off. He took his jacket off. He sat down. Victoria was still at the stove, her back to him, stirring something. She was wearing the dark green sweater, swan. Chloe's assessment had been correct. And her hair was down, and she looked, in the specific light of his kitchen at 7:15 on a Wednesday evening, like someone who had found a temporary equilibrium and was trying not to disturb it. You didn't have to do this, he said. You do it every night, she said without turning around. It's my apartment. It's still every night. She brought the pan to the table. You got home late, and you were going to make something anyway, and I was here, and I know how to cook. So, he looked at the pan. You know how to cook, he said. I had a phase, she said, sitting down. About 5 years ago, when I was trying to have a life outside the office. Took classes, never had time to use it. She picked up her fork. Apparently it's like riding a bike. Chloe pointed at Ryan's plate meaningfully. He served himself. The chicken was good. Better than good. The lemon and the wine and the garlic had done something together that his versions of this never quite managed. And he ate it and didn't say anything except that it was good, and she said thank you, and he started to say stop saying that, and then realized the absurdity of the cycle they'd gotten into and just ate his food instead. After dinner, Chloe asked if Victoria had called her mom again today. For a little while, Victoria said. Is she coming to dinner on Thursday too? Victoria hesitated. No, just my dad. Chloe considered this. Is that going to be weird? Ryan said, Chloe. What? I'm asking. Victoria looked at the table. It might be a little weird, she said, but probably okay. I'll be there, Chloe said, with the tone of someone announcing backup. If it gets weird, I'll start talking about Gerald, and that usually unweirds things. Ryan pressed his hand over his mouth. That is a strategy, Victoria said carefully. It's a good one, Chloe said. Gerald is universally interesting. Thursday came. Ryan cleaned the apartment in the morning before his route. Not frantic cleaning, just the systematic kind. The kind where you dealt with the things you'd been ignoring for a week and put fresh dish towels out and wiped down the counters and accepted that the space was what it was and cleaned it rather than transformed it. He left for his route at 5:30 and was back by 2, which was better than he'd managed all week. He showered, changed into jeans and the dark blue flannel that Chloe had once declared was his best shirt, because it had no holes and matched his eyes, a detail he'd filed away in the specific category of things Chloe notices that I don't. He spent the next 2 hours cooking. He made the thing he knew how to make well, not the thing he'd make to impress someone, because that impulse, examined, seemed like the wrong one. The right thing was the honest thing, the thing that was actually him. So he made the braised short ribs that took 3 hours, and that he'd learned from a recipe card his grandmother had written in her cramped handwriting and that he'd transcribed into his phone because the card was disintegrating. He made roasted potatoes. He made a salad with the ingredients that he knew rather than the ones that seemed correct for a dinner with a billionaire. Victoria appeared from the living room around 3 and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. "Do you need help?" she asked. "Not yet." She sat at the table with her coffee and her book, and she was there, which was a different thing from her being absent, and the kitchen was warm from the oven, and the afternoon light was doing what late October afternoon light did, coming in low and slightly golden through the kitchen window, the kind that made ordinary things look more settled in themselves. She looked up from her book at one point and said, "You're nervous." "I'm not nervous," he said. "You checked the ribs twice in the last 10 minutes. I'm monitoring them." Braising requires monitoring. "Ryan." "What?" "It's going to be fine," she said. He doesn't care about the food. He's not coming to evaluate your apartment or your cooking." "I know that." "Then why are you checking the ribs every 5 minutes?" He turned from the stove and looked at her. She looked back. She had the composed expression she'd been wearing less frequently over the past 3 days, the careful one, and underneath it was something more straightforward. She was watching him, and she was slightly amused, and she was also genuinely trying to offer something reassuring, and all 3 of those things were visible in the same face at the same time, which he found a little disarming. "I'm not used to having people here," he said. Not adults. I have a neighbor sometimes, Chloe's school friends, occasionally, but not—" He gestured vaguely. "I'm out of practice." "You seemed very practiced when you invited a stranger off the street into your home," she said. "That was easier." "Why?" He turned back to the stove. "Because you needed something simple," he said. "You needed a place to be. I could provide that. This is different. This is your father coming to my table, and I don't know what he needs, and I can't read the room I'm going to be responsible for." Silence. "He needs to see me okay," Victoria said quietly. "That's all he's coming for. He needs to see that I'm okay, and that the place I've been is—" She paused. "Real. He's good at people on his own terms. He's not good with things he can't control or quantify. Coming here is him trying, and him trying is—" She found the word. "Rare." Ryan nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He checked the ribs. She read her book. Chloe came home from school at 3:40 with the Monday through Friday energy of a child who had been holding it together in a structured environment all day and was now releasing at full capacity. She dropped her backpack in the hall, not on the hook, just on the floor, in the spot she always dropped it despite the hook being directly above, announced she was starving, accepted a piece of bread from Ryan, noticed the smell of the ribs, and declared dinner was going to be incredible. Don't mess it up. "I appreciate the confidence," Ryan said. She went to change and came back in what she evidently considered appropriate dinner attire. Her least faded jeans and a sweater with a small embroidered flower on the collar that she'd been given for her birthday, and then climbed up onto the counter to sit beside Ryan and ask questions about the cooking process, with the genuine interest of someone who found it fascinating and the interrogative energy of someone who found silence insufficient. "Why do you cook it covered? Keeps the moisture in? What's braise? Cooking in liquid with low heat for a long time. Why not just cook it fast?" "Because the meat's tough. Low and slow breaks down the connective tissue." "What's connective tissue?" "The stuff that holds the muscle together." "Why are we eating muscle?" He looked at her. She looked back. "Everything is something," she said philosophically, and ate another piece of bread. Edward Sterling arrived at 6:30. He came alone, no security, just himself, in a coat that was clearly expensive but had been chosen correctly for the occasion, not the suit from Monday. He knocked the same way as before, that 3-knock precision, But something about it was different this time. Less authority in it, more arrival. Ryan opened the door. Edward Sterling looked for the second time like a man who was recalibrating in real time. He was taking in the same apartment he'd stood in on Monday, but he was standing in it differently, not looking past it, not assessing it against some other benchmark, just looking at it. "Come in," Ryan said. He came in. Chloe materialized from the hallway in her dinner sweater and looked up at him. "Hi," she said. "Hello," he said. "I'm Chloe." "I know, I'm Edward." She looked at him for a moment with that direct, considering look she used when she was deciding something. "You can sit in the living room," she said, "but the chair on the left wobbles a little, so I'd take the couch." Ryan made a sound. Edward Sterling looked at the chair and then at the couch and sat on the couch. Victoria came from the kitchen, and when she and her father looked at each other, it was different from Monday in the specific way that a conversation 2 days after a real argument was different from the argument itself. Not resolved exactly, but the edges of it less sharp, both people more tired and less defended, and possibly more honest for it. "Hi, Dad," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," he said. Just that. Just the simplest exchange, the kind that had probably been said thousands of times in their relationship and had gotten buried under the weight of everything those two people had built up around each other over years. Ryan went back to the kitchen. He finished the potatoes. He dressed the salad. He called everyone to the table at 7, which was slightly later than he'd planned because the ribs had needed another 20 minutes. The table was the table. 3 working chairs and the repaired one, which Ryan took, having tested its stability that morning and deemed it acceptable for his weight if he didn't lean. He'd put out the real plates, the ones that matched, which were the ones he used for holidays and Chloe's birthday. He didn't have cloth napkins. He had paper napkins. He put them out without apology. Edward Sterling sat across from Chloe. Victoria sat beside Ryan. For a moment, nobody said anything. The specific pause of people at a table who were adjusting to the reality of sitting down together when sitting down together contained this much unspoken material. Then Chloe said, "Okay, can I just say, it smells amazing and Daddy's been checking it every 5 minutes, so we should probably eat before he checks it again." The tension at the table broke cleanly, the way good tension breaking usually did. Suddenly, and with a sound, in this case a short, surprised laugh from Edward Sterling that seemed to come from somewhere genuine rather than performed. "Let's eat," Ryan said. They ate. The ribs were good. He knew they were good when he tasted them. The kind of good that came from the recipe and the time, and not from any particular skill of his own. The honest kind. Edward Sterling ate with the specific attention of someone who was actually tasting it rather than simply consuming, and at one point said, "This is remarkable." And Ryan said, "Old recipe." And that was the whole exchange about the food. The conversation moved through the evening in the way that conversations did at small tables where people were figuring out the geography of each other. Edward asked Chloe about school. She told him about Gerald. He listened with the focused attention of a man who was used to listening in rooms where everything said had strategic significance, and had to recalibrate to a register where a hamster's escape attempts were simply a hamster's escape attempts. He recalibrated visibly over about 4 minutes. "He went behind the bookshelf both times?" he asked. "Both times," Chloe confirmed. "Ms. Callahan says he's clever. I think he's just stubborn." "Those aren't mutually exclusive," Edward said. Chloe pointed her fork at him. "That's what Victoria said." Edward glanced at Victoria. Victoria was looking at the table, but the corner of her mouth had moved. He looked back at Chloe. "She's smart," he said. "I know," Chloe said. "She said you were sometimes too." "She did?" "She said it was the problem." Chloe turned back to her food. "That you were both smart and both sure you were right, and neither of you was willing to be the first one to say you weren't." The table went quiet. Ryan looked at Chloe with the expression of a father who was simultaneously proud of his child's perceptiveness and aware that it was currently operating without a filter. "Chloe," he said. "It's what she said," Chloe said, with the unruffled quality of someone who didn't understand why the truth was complicated. Victoria had her head down. The corner of her mouth was doing more work now. Edward Sterling looked at his daughter for a long moment. "She's right," he said quietly. "That is what the problem was." He said it to Chloe. Not to Victoria. The way you sometimes admitted things more easily to a person outside the relationship, a person who wasn't carrying the history of it. I know, Chloe said, but you came to dinner, so that's the first one. Ryan put his fork down very carefully. He looked at the wall. He was not going to say anything because there was nothing to add to what a 7-year-old had just said, and sometimes the only correct response to a perfect thing was to not disturb it. Victoria looked up. Her eyes were slightly wet, which she was managing with a control that was holding but only just. Edward Sterling was looking at Chloe with an expression that Ryan had not seen on the man's face in the limited time he'd observed him. Not the authority, not the control, not even the tired father quality from Monday. Something more stripped than any of those. Something that looked like a man seeing, for the first time in a long time, what was actually in front of him rather than what he'd decided should be there. "You're right," he said again, to Chloe. Simple. "Okay," Chloe said, and served herself more potatoes. After dinner, Ryan did the dishes and let the three of them sit in the living room. He could hear the conversation in fragments, not the content, just the shape of it. The way Victoria's voice had a different quality in it than it had on Monday, something that was opening rather than defending, and the way Edward's voice had an unfamiliarity to it, like a man using a register he hadn't used in a while and was relearning the mechanics of. Chloe, from the sound of it, had taken up residence between them on the couch and was drawing, which was how she participated in adult conversations she found interesting. She stayed close and worked on something, so she had a reason to be there, and listened, and occasionally inserted a sentence that landed like a scalpel. Ryan dried the dishes and put them away. He thought about what Victoria had said earlier in the week, that going back wasn't running toward something, it was choosing. The difference between a thing you were pushed into and a thing you walked into with your eyes open. He thought about the way she'd sounded on the phone with her mother 2 days ago. Not the specific words, just the quality of the sound, the gradual steadying of it, the long pauses where she was listening to something and absorbing it rather than preparing a response. He thought about Chloe's assessment. She'll come back. Not to stay. Just, she'll come back. He put away the last pot. He leaned against the counter and looked at the window, at the dark alley outside, at the fire escape landing where 2 people had sat with their coffee on a cold Sunday morning because the apartment had felt too small for what they were each carrying. He heard Chloe's voice. "Is Sterling Capital named after your family, or did you name your family after your company?" Edward's voice. "The company came first." Chloe. "That seems backwards, Victoria." Chloe. Edward unexpectedly. "She's not wrong." A pause. Chloe. "How much is $1 billion, actually?" Ryan walked to the doorway of the living room. "All right," he said. "Bedtime." Chloe looked up. "We're talking about numbers." "And you can continue being interested in numbers tomorrow morning." He looked at her with the specific look. "Go." She submitted to this with the theatrical reluctance she reserved for bedtimes she disagreed with, said goodnight to Victoria, and then looked at Edward Sterling. "You should come back," she told him. He looked slightly startled. "Should I?" "Yeah, you're better in person than on the phone." She glanced at Victoria. "Victoria says that about most people, that they're better in person." She looked back at Edward. "I think it's true for you." She went to her room. Ryan stood in the doorway. Edward Sterling was looking at the hallway where Chloe had disappeared with an expression that was trying to stay composed and was mostly succeeding except around the eyes. "She's extraordinary," he said. To Ryan. Directly. "Yeah," Ryan said. "I know. You've done—" Edward paused. "On your own. It's not—" He stopped again. The man was very controlled and was having trouble being controlled, which was visible in the slight awkwardness of the sentences that kept starting and not quite finishing. Ryan waited. "You've done well by her," Edward said finally. Simply, "I'm trying," Ryan said. Which was the most honest answer. He wasn't going to say thank you, and he wasn't going to perform humility. He was trying, and he knew he was, and that was what he had. Edward nodded. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. "I owe you something," Edward said then. "You don't," Ryan said immediately. "Not money." Edward looked at him directly. "I mean, I owe you an acknowledgement of what you did." He paused. You opened your home to my daughter when she had nothing except what she'd walked away from. You didn't ask who she was. You didn't leverage it. You just... He stopped. She stopped for my kid, Ryan said. That's where it starts and ends. It doesn't start and end there, Edward said. Not for her. Whatever happened here in the last... He looked around the apartment, at the drawings on the fridge, at the mismatched bowls in the rack, at the couch with the folded blanket on the arm. Whatever happened here changed something. She talks differently. She looks differently. He met Ryan's gaze. I don't know exactly what that is, but I know it didn't come from 6 months of running. It came from here. Ryan was quiet. Victoria, from the couch, was looking at nothing in particular with the expression of someone who was receiving information and didn't quite know where to put it yet. She did it herself, Ryan said carefully. I didn't do anything except not make it harder. You'd be surprised, Edward said, how rare that is. He stayed until 9:30. The conversation moved through things Ryan wouldn't have expected. Edward asked about the delivery routes, asked about how the van worked as a business structure, asked without the top-down quality of a man assessing a subordinate, but with the genuine curiosity of someone who had spent his life knowing one world and was encountering a different set of mechanics. Ryan answered directly. He didn't minimize what he did or inflate it. The roots were the roots. The math was tight. Some months were tighter than others. At one point, Edward said, Have you ever considered... And then stopped himself, and Ryan saw it. The reflex of a man who solved problems by throwing resources at them beginning to engage, and Edward catching it and stopping it. Sorry, Edward said. Don't be, Ryan said. But also what? No. I'm fine. I know you are, Edward said, and he seemed to mean it. When he left, he stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at Victoria. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks. She said, and then we talk about what it looks like, not what it was. What it looks like. She nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something more, and then decided that what had already been said tonight was probably sufficient, and that more words would dilute it. He nodded at Ryan. Good night, he said. Good night, Ryan said. The door closed. The apartment returned to its ordinary size. Victoria stood in the middle of the living room with her arms wrapped loosely around herself and looked at nothing for a moment. The specific look of someone processing a long day's worth of experience and not yet done with it. You okay? Ryan asked. Yes, she exhaled. I think yes. She looked at him. He heard me again, twice in 1 week. She shook her head slightly. He's never... She didn't finish the sentence. People can change, Ryan said. Some of them. I know. She looked at the couch, at the blanket on the arm. I'd given up expecting it. He stood in the kitchen doorway. What Chloe said, Victoria said. At the table. About the first one to say they weren't right. Yeah. She's 7. She has good instincts, Ryan said. Told you that at the beginning. You said she was right about people. You didn't say she'd dismantle a decade of family dysfunction over short ribs. I undersold her, he agreed. Victoria looked at him. She was tired. The whole day was in her face. The phone call that morning with her sister, which had been thorny in a different way than the one with her father. 2 different kinds of complicated. And the afternoon of bracing for dinner. And dinner itself, which had asked more of her than a dinner had any right to. She was tired and she was still standing, and Ryan thought there was a version of strength that didn't look like strength at all. It just looked like a person who hadn't sat down yet because sitting down meant admitting how heavy the day had been. Go to sleep, he said. You don't have to figure out the rest of it tonight. She held his gaze for a moment. Ryan? What? Thank you. She said it before he could tell her not to. I know you're going to say stop saying that, but I mean it in a way that doesn't have another word. She paused. You didn't make it weird when you found out who I was. You didn't... She stopped. You just kept making toast and checking the ribs and letting me be a person. She looked at the chipped mug on the counter, his name in green and yellow. I forgot that I was one. Before this, I think I forgot that I was just a person. Ryan looked at the mug. He looked at her. You're a person who burns pancakes, he said. The first one, she said, one pancake. A person who argues about a single failed pancake. Because it's not a fair characterization. Okay, she said. A pause, not uncomfortable. The neighbor in 4D wrapped up at 10:45 on schedule. The city outside did its thing. Go to sleep, he said again. She went. He stood in the kitchen for a while after, with the light still on and the remains of a dinner that had gone better than it had any right to, and the quiet of a space that had been through something that evening and was settling back into itself. He was not going to think about what came next. He was going to think about the fact that the ribs had been good, and the potatoes had been good, and his kid had said exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, with the natural accuracy of someone who had no idea she'd just done something. He was going to think about the fact that Edward Sterling had sat in his chair with the repaired armrest and eaten his food and said, "You've done well by her," and meant it. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to his room. He lay in the dark and listened to the city and the building and the soft sound of Chloe's white noise machine from down the hall, and from the living room, the absence of sound that meant Victoria was either asleep or very close to it. 10 days left of 2 weeks. He closed his eyes. The water stain on the ceiling was shaped like a duck or a boot, depending on the light. Tonight, in the dark, it looked like neither. It just looked like a ceiling, which was, he thought, its own kind of progress. The 10 remaining days moved the way the first 4 had. Not smoothly, not dramatically, just honestly, with the ordinary friction of real life refusing to pause for significance. Ryan's van needed this tire properly replaced on Friday, which cost $212 he hadn't planned for, and he sat in the waiting area of the service station on Hollis Street for an hour and a half, doing the math on his phone with the focused grimness of a man who had done this particular math many times before and had gotten no better at enjoying it. Victoria had offered, twice, with the careful neutrality of someone who understood exactly why the offer would likely be refused. He'd refused it, both times, without making it a thing. She'd let it go without making it a thing either, which he appreciated more than he said. The tooth situation happened on Saturday. Chloe woke up with a molar that had been quietly troubling her for 2 weeks, suddenly announcing itself at full volume, and Ryan spent the morning on the phone navigating the pediatric dental office's Saturday emergency line, which required being transferred twice and placed on hold once for 11 minutes, during which time Chloe sat on the couch with her cheek against a cold pack that Victoria held in place while reading aloud from the thriller she'd finished, and started again because Chloe had asked what it was about, and then demanded to hear it from the beginning. "She's 7, Ryan said, returning from the phone with an appointment time. "She asked," Victoria said. "It's a thriller. There's a murder in chapter 2. I summarized around it. Chloe, through the cold pack. "There's a what?" "A misunderstanding," Victoria said. "That gets resolved." Ryan looked at the ceiling. The dentist confirmed a cavity, drilled it on the spot because the appointment had opened up, and Chloe emerged with a numb left cheek and the mild, bewildered indignation of someone who had been wronged by their own tooth enamel. She was given a small rubber dinosaur by the hygienist, which she accepted as partial reparations. In the car on the way home, with Chloe in the back seat pressing the dinosaur thoughtfully against her numbed cheek, Victoria turned to Ryan and said quietly, "You're good at this." "At dental emergencies?" "At all of it." She was looking at him directly. "The managing, the juggling, the—" She paused. "You never make her feel like she's a problem to be solved, even when she's inconvenient, which, to be clear, is frequently." "She's not inconvenient," Ryan said. "I'm not saying she is. I'm saying you never make her feel like she is. Even when you're tired, even when the math doesn't work." She looked at the window. "Most people can't do that. My father couldn't do it. He loved me. He was never absent. He was just always solving me rather than seeing me." She paused. "You see her." Ryan kept his eyes on the road. "From the back," Chloe announced, "I can hear you talking about me." "We know," Ryan said, "just so you know." "Noted," Victoria said. Chloe went back to her dinosaur. Ryan drove home. He thought about what Victoria had said for the rest of the day in the specific background processing way of someone who'd received something they weren't sure what to do with yet. Not uncomfortable with it, just holding it. She was leaving in 10 days, and then 9, and then 7, and then 5, And the countdown was not discussed, but it was present in the apartment the way weather was present. You didn't have to name it for it to affect the quality of the air. They talked about it finally, on Wednesday of the second week. Chloe was at school. Ryan had a short morning route and was back by 11. Victoria was on the fire escape with her coffee, which had become as reliable a ritual as Ryan's own alarm clock, and he poured his own cup and opened the door and stepped out into the cold. She moved over on the step without being asked. He sat. The alley was doing its ordinary Wednesday morning things. A delivery truck idling at the far end, the dumpster slightly more full than usual, the scraggly tree now holding only 2 orange leaves with a determination that had become, over the past 2 weeks, something Ryan had developed a private respect for. "You've been thinking about it," he said, "about going back." "Yeah." She turned the coffee mug in her hands. "Every day, Gibbet," she said. "And every day it looks different depending on what kind of day it is." She paused. "Monday, I thought, I can go back and change everything. Restructure the company, hire a real operations team, step back from the day-to-day, make it a thing that doesn't require me to be always on." She looked at the alley. "Tuesday, I thought, what if I just don't go back at all? What if I start something different, something smaller, something I built from what I actually know now rather than what I inherited?" "And today?" he asked. "Today I think, I have to go back first, before I decide any of the rest of it. I have to stand in it again and see what it feels like now with this—" She stopped. "With everything that's different." "What's different?" She looked at him sideways. "You know what's different," she said. He did know. He just wanted to hear how she said it. She said it quietly, to the alley, not to him. "I know what it feels like to be a person. Not a position, not a portfolio, not a family legacy. A person who makes pancakes that fail and sits on a cold fire escape and argues about crayon colors with a second grader." She paused. "I know what it feels like to be in a room where nobody wants anything from me except to pass the salad." He was quiet. "That's not nothing," he said. "No," she said, "it's everything." The delivery truck at the end of the alley finished whatever it was doing and pulled away. The dumpster sat in its uninspiring permanence. The 2 leaves held. "Victoria," he said. What are you doing when you go back?" She turned her head. "What do you mean?" He looked at the tree. "I mean, I know you're going back. I know you're going to have the conversations with your father and with the board and with whoever else is in line waiting. I know that's going to take time and it's going to be hard, and most of it you're going to have to figure out on your own." He paused. "But what are you actually doing, day to day? What does the new version look like?" She thought about it. "Less," she said finally. "It looks like less. Less meetings that exist to justify other meetings. Less events I attend because the calendar said to. Less—" She turned the mug. "My father built the company around fear. Fear of not having enough. I built it bigger around the same fear, just at a different scale." She paused. "I want to build something, or rebuild something, around a different question. Not what happens if we lose, but what are we actually trying to create? Can you do that? Inside what already exists?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe. Partly." She looked at him. "I think I need to try before I decide I can't." He nodded. "And your father," he said. "Thursday changed something." "Thursday changed a lot," she said quietly. "He called me Friday morning just to— He said he'd been thinking about what Chloe said, about being the first one." She shook her head slightly. "A 7-year-old in a Target sweater got further in one dinner than I did in 4 years of boardroom arguments." "She has an unfair advantage," Ryan said. "What's that?" "She doesn't need anything from him. So he couldn't see an angle, couldn't calculate." He paused. "She was just honest, and he had no defense for it." Victoria looked at him. "You're more perceptive than you let on," she said. The same word she'd used on the fire escape 2 weeks ago. "You said that already," he said. "It's still true." He drank his coffee. The cold was doing what late October cold did in the morning. Sitting in the joints, making the metal fire escape feel like the surface of something arctic. And he became aware of it gradually, the way you became aware of things that had been there all along. "I'm going to miss it," Victoria said. "This." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the alley and the fire escape, and the cold, and the building, and by extension, everything inside it. I know it's not. I know it's temporary. I know it was never going to be anything except temporary, but I'm going to miss it. He looked at the last 2 leaves on the scraggly tree. You can come back, he said. Chloe told your father he should. The offer extends. As a visitor. As whatever you want to call it, an adult who knows where we keep the spare towels and whose mug is which. He paused. You don't have to put a category on it. She looked at him. I'm not good at that, she said. Not putting categories on things. I know. It's a control thing. If you can define it, you can manage it. I know that too. And you're suggesting I just let it be what it is, he said. Yeah. She was quiet. Is that what you're doing? She asked. With this. She stopped, tried again. With whatever this has been. He turned his head and looked at her directly. This was the question he'd been turning over for a week, the one that came with him on the routes and sat with him in the service station waiting room and lay in the dark on the ceiling above his bed. He'd been honest with himself about it, which was the prerequisite for being honest out loud. Yeah, he said. I'm letting it be what it is. She held his gaze. Which is? Something real, he said. Not convenient, not logical, not something I can explain to Mrs. Okafor in 4A without it sounding like a movie plot. He paused. But real. The people who matter are the ones you don't have an angle with. And I don't have an angle with you, and I think you know that by now. I do, she said quietly. So, she said. It was not a resolution. He knew that. She knew that. 2 people sitting on a fire escape in 38-degree weather with half-cold coffee and the residue of 2 weeks of unexpected life between them. That was not a resolution. That was the beginning of something that would have to be built carefully, in the time available, around the realities of 2 very different lives that had not become less different just because they'd occupied the same small apartment. But it was honest. And honest, Ryan had come to believe over 32 years of varying degrees of difficulty was the only foundation that held. He put his hand over hers on the step between them. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over. They sat like that, in the cold, with the city moving below and the tree holding its last 2 leaves, until the coffee was fully cold and the chill had moved past bearable. And then they went inside. Chawoch. The recital was that Friday. Chloe had mentioned it approximately 40 times over the preceding 2 weeks, in the way she mentioned things that mattered, not anxiously, just persistently, each mention carrying the quiet weight of this is important, register it. She'd been rehearsing her part. The 2nd grade class was doing 3 songs, and Chloe had the 3rd verse of the middle one, which she'd performed for the apartment at least 4 times, once to Ryan, once to Victoria, and twice apparently to the hallway, when she thought no one was listening. She had a specific outfit planned, the dress with the blue flowers that she'd worn to her friend Lily's birthday in June, which still fit if she didn't try to sit down cross-legged in it. She'd laid it out on her bed on Thursday evening and explained to Ryan, with the precision of someone running a production meeting, that she would need her hair done in the French braid, not the regular one, and that this was important because the French braid stayed in longer and she didn't want to be adjusting it on stage. Ryan could not reliably do a French braid. He could do a regular braid and a ponytail and a thing that was technically a braid if you were generous with the definition. The French braid was beyond his current skill set. He asked Victoria. She said of course, and Friday morning she did Chloe's hair at the kitchen table while Chloe ate her cereal in a rare alignment of activities that required her to stay still, and Ryan stood at the counter with his coffee and watched the French braid emerge with a technical precision that Chloe inspected in her phone camera and declared perfect, which is exactly what I needed. You're welcome, Victoria said. Thank you, Chloe said with complete sincerity. Ryan burned the toast. Nobody commented. It had become something past a joke now, closer to a ritual. He ate it anyway. They drove to the school in the van, all 3 of them in the front, because the back was still carrying the week's last undelivered packages, and Chloe sat in the middle with her dress carefully smoothed and her French braid intact and her hands folded in her lap in the specific posture of a 7-year-old performing composure. Are you nervous? Victoria asked her. No, Chloe said. It's okay if you are. I'm not nervous, Chloe said. Then, my stomach feels weird. That's nervous, Ryan said. I said I'm not nervous. Okay. My stomach just feels weird. I know. Chloe looked out the windshield. What if I forget the words, she said in the quieter voice she used when she was admitting something she'd been not admitting. You've said them 40 times in the last 2 weeks, Ryan said. You're not going to forget the words. But what if I do? Victoria said. Then you hum the melody and pretend you're doing it on purpose. Chloe looked at her. Does that work? I used it at a board presentation 3 years ago when I lost my place in the data. Hummed 2 bars of something while I found my slide. Nobody knew. Chloe stared at her. You hum at board presentations? Just the once? And nobody noticed? Confidence is most of it, Victoria said. If you act like it's intentional, people usually believe you. Chloe absorbed this with the focused attention she used for information she planned to use. Okay, she said. Okay, that's good. They parked 2 blocks away because the school lot was already full, which Ryan had predicted and Chloe had disputed. And they walked the 2 blocks with Chloe between them holding Ryan's hand on the left, and, after a moment's consideration, reaching up for Victoria's on the right. Victoria took it. The school gymnasium smelled like all school gymnasiums everywhere. The particular combination of floor wax and old sneakers, and something institutional that never quite aired out. And it was already filling with the organized chaos of families finding seats, parents lifting children to show them where to go, grandparents moving with the careful authority of people who had done more school events than they could count. Ryan found 3 seats in the 4th row. He sat in the middle. He'd been going to put Chloe between them, but she'd gone straight backstage with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before and knew the route. And now it was him and Victoria in the 4th row with an empty seat between them and the folded program that the parent volunteers were handing out at the door. He looked at the program. Chloe's name was in the 2nd song listing, printed in the small font they used for individual parts. 3rd verse, Chloe Hayes. He looked at it for a moment. Chloe Hayes. His daughter's name in the program at her school recital, which was an ordinary thing, the most ordinary thing, the kind of thing that happened in school gymnasiums every November in every city everywhere, parents sitting in folding chairs waiting for their children to perform songs they'd been practicing for 3 weeks. He folded the program. He put it in his jacket pocket. He would put it in the small box in his closet where he kept the drawing she made for him on Father's Day, and the card she'd made when he was sick 2 winters ago, and the photo of the 2 of them at the beach the summer she was 4, sunburned and laughing, and both of them squinting into the same light. The ordinary things were the things that lasted. He had learned this. He glanced to his right. Edward Sterling and a woman who had to be Victoria's mother were standing at the far end of the row, looking at the available seats. The woman, Margaret Sterling, he'd seen her name but not her face until now, was smaller than he'd imagined and had Victoria's eyes exactly, that dark brown that held more than it showed, and she was looking around the gymnasium with the expression of someone genuinely interested in where they'd ended up. Edward saw Ryan, nodded. Ryan nodded back. They came down the row. Margaret Sterling sat beside Victoria, and there was a moment, brief and private, where she put her hand on her daughter's face, just for a second, the way mothers did, the way that needed no words and used none, and Victoria closed her eyes and let it happen. Edward sat beside his wife. Ryan looked at the stage. The lights went down and the noise settled, and the children filed out from the wings in their carefully selected outfits, and the teachers arranged them on the risers with the patient expertise of people who had done this many times, and had developed a philosophical acceptance of the gap between rehearsal and performance. Chloe was in the 2nd row, second from the left. She found Ryan immediately. He saw her eyes scan the audience and land on him, the small, visible relief of it, the straightening. And then she saw Victoria, and something in her face did the thing that only happened for things she'd hoped for, the full sun thing, controlled now because she was on stage, but present, clearly present. Then she saw the 2 people beside Victoria. She looked at Victoria. Victoria gave the smallest nod. Chloe looked back at the audience with an expression that was managing about 4 emotions at once, and managing all of them imperfectly, which was the most human thing in the room. The first song started. Ryan would not have called it technically proficient. The elementary school choir was doing what elementary school choirs did, hitting most of the notes most of the time, compensating for the ones they missed with a volume and commitment that had its own kind of power. The parents in the audience had the specific expression of people who were moved by something that was objectively imperfect, the expression you could only have when you loved someone performing, when the performance mattered not because of the quality, but because of the person inside it. He was that expression. He'd been that expression for 4 years of recitals and class plays and one disastrous soccer season, and Chloe's first attempt at a science fair project that had not gone as planned, but had been presented with a confidence that he thought about sometimes when he needed to remember what actual courage looked like. The second song began, and 2 verses in, Chloe stepped forward slightly and sang her verse, the words she'd been practicing for 3 weeks, delivered now at performance volume in the slightly too loud way of a child who had been told to project and had committed to projecting regardless of the acoustics. She didn't forget the words. She sang them clearly and slightly off-key in the way that was entirely hers and looked directly at Ryan for the first verse and then, at the end of it, looked at Victoria. The small moment of it, his daughter on a school stage choosing to look at this person, choosing to include her in the thing that mattered, hit Ryan somewhere he hadn't expected. He looked at the stage. He looked at his program in his pocket. He looked at his hands, 32 years old. Tired in a way that had become so familiar he'd forgotten what it felt like to not carry it. Routes and invoices and soft tires and math that never came out the way he needed it to. A couch that needed replacing and an elevator that didn't work and a water stain on the ceiling that was shaped like something different every night. And this was also the sum total. His daughter singing slightly off-key on a stage, looking at a woman who had stopped in the rain because a child fell and nobody else did. In a gymnasium that smelled like floor wax, with a French braid that would probably last until midnight, and a program with her name in small print, and an entire row of people who had shown up because she'd asked, because she mattered, because presence was the one currency that actually counted, and she had somehow, at 7 years old, already understood this. The song ended. The audience applauded. Chloe found Ryan's eyes immediately, and he gave her the thumbs up he always gave her, and she gave him the small, private smile back. The one that was just between them. The 7-year-old version of a handshake that they'd developed somewhere in the last 2 years, and that he intended to collect for as long as she'd give it to him. Then she looked at Victoria again, and Victoria put her hand over her heart, the simple gesture, and Chloe beamed. Ba-si-chi. After the recital, the gymnasium dissolved into the post-performance chaos, children running to parents, parents crouching for photos, teachers doing the controlled herding of people toward the exit. Chloe came off the stage steps and ran across the gymnasium floor in the blue flower dress with the French braid bouncing, ran directly to Ryan and was lifted and held in the way that he'd been doing since she was 2 years old and that she still permitted without complaint because some things were exempt from the dignity rules. "You were great," he said into the top of her head. "I projected," she said, muffled against his shoulder. "You absolutely projected. Did you hear me?" "The entire room heard you." She pulled back to look at him with bright eyes. "Was that bad?" "It was perfect," he said. The first time he'd used that word in 2 weeks without irony, and he meant it. She scrambled down and went to Victoria. Victoria caught her, held her, and this moment Ryan did not look away from. His daughter and this woman, in a school gymnasium on a Friday night in November, holding each other with the uncomplicated ease of people who had figured out, somewhere between card games and hair braids and burned toast and cold fire escapes, that they were safe together. "Thank you for coming," Chloe said, pulling back but keeping both hands on Victoria's arms. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," Victoria said. "You brought them," Chloe said, glancing at Edward and Margaret Sterling, who had moved up behind Victoria. "They wanted to come," Victoria said. Chloe looked at Edward Sterling. He had Ryan noticed an expression he'd not worn in either previous appearance. Not the authority, not the careful, controlled manner, not even the tiredness. He was looking at his daughter holding a 7-year-old in a school gymnasium with the specific look of a man who was seeing something clearly for the first time. The uncomfortable and necessary clarity of being shown what you'd been missing, not by argument, but by just being in the room while it happened. Margaret Sterling stepped forward and crouched down to Chloe's eye level. "You were wonderful," she said simply. Thank you, Chloe said. Then, studying her with the frank assessment she used for new people. You have the same eyes as Victoria. She got them from me, Margaret said. That's a good thing to get from your mom, Chloe said. Margaret Sterling looked up at Victoria, who was looking at the gymnasium ceiling and breathing steadily. It is, Margaret said. Chloe looked at Ryan with the expression of someone who had surveyed the situation and arrived at a conclusion. Daddy, she said, can we go get something to eat? I'm starving and I sang really hard. Ryan looked at the group assembled in the gymnasium. His daughter in her performance dress, Victoria still composed but only just, Edward and Margaret Sterling standing in a school gymnasium in their expensive coats looking like people in the middle of something that was remaking them in real time, which was exactly what they were. Yeah, he said. Let's go eat. There was a diner 4 blocks from the school, the kind that had been in the same location for 30 years and had the menu laminated and the coffee constantly available and the booths worn smooth from decades of people occupying them for ordinary and extraordinary reasons alike. Ryan had been coming here since before Chloe was born. He knew which booths were comfortable and which had a draft from the window, and that the pie was made in-house, and that the waitress on Friday nights was a woman named Donna, who had been there as long as the laminate menus, and who called everyone honey with the sincerity of someone who meant it. They took the large booth in the back. 6 people in a diner booth, which was tight, and Chloe ended up between Ryan and Victoria because she'd engineered it that way with the smooth efficiency of someone who had decided on the configuration before they'd sat down. Margaret Sterling sat across from Chloe and looked at her with the warm, slightly wondering attention of a woman who had grandmotherly instincts in a grandchild-shaped space that had not yet been filled. Edward Sterling sat beside his wife and looked at the laminate menu with the focused attention of a man giving himself a moment. Donna appeared, called everyone honey, took their order. Chloe ordered the pancakes, which Donna did not find strange for a Friday night, and declared she wanted them with butter and syrup and no fruit because fruit on pancakes was, in her view, a category error. Strong opinion, Margaret said. Fruit is for after, Chloe explained patiently, not during. She's right, Victoria said. See, Chloe said. Edward Sterling ordered the coffee and the chicken sandwich and said nothing about the diner's decor, or the laminate menus, or the fact that the booth fabric had a repair on the corner that had been there long enough to become part of the character of the thing. He just sat in the booth and drank his water and looked, slowly and visibly, like a man who was letting something go. Not all at once. In increments, the way anything real happened. The food came. They ate. Margaret asked Chloe about school in the way of someone who genuinely wanted to know, who leaned forward and listened to the full answer rather than waiting for a pause to move on. Chloe, recognizing authentic interest, provided the full answer, which included Gerald the hamster, the science project that had not worked out, the situation with Lily moving away, and her current ambivalence about whether marine biology or pastry was the right long-term direction. You could do both, Margaret said, study marine biology and bake as a hobby. Chloe considered this with serious attention. Would I have time? Depends on how you build your life. How do you build a life? Margaret looked at her husband briefly, a married for decades look, the kind that contained a full conversation compressed into a second. You make decisions, she said. Some of them work out and some of them don't, and the ones that don't teach you something if you let them. What if you don't let them? Then you make the same decision again until you do. Chloe turned to Ryan. Is that true? Yes, he said. Have you done that? More than once. She nodded, filing it. Across the table, Edward set down his coffee cup. He looked at Ryan. I'd like to say something, he said. Not loudly, not the boardroom voice. The other one, the one that had appeared in fragments over the past 2 weeks. Okay, Ryan said. Victoria told me... He paused. She told me what you said. About the company. About the dependency that was built into it. He paused again. That it wasn't a system, it was a dependency. Ryan waited. I've been thinking about that for a week, Edward said. And I think... He looked at his coffee cup. I think I built something that needed her to need it. I told myself it was opportunity, that I was giving her a world. He looked up. But you build something that can't function without one person. You haven't built an opportunity. You've built a cage. He said the word carefully, like testing its weight. And she walked out of it in March. And my first instinct was to rebuild the walls rather than ask why she'd needed to leave. The table was quiet. Chloe was eating her pancakes. She was listening, Ryan knew, with the peripheral awareness she used for adult conversations that mattered. But she was eating her pancakes and not interrupting, which was the highest form of restraint available to her, and he noted it. "I can't undo 10 years, Edward said. I'm not standing here claiming I figured everything out in 2 weeks because a child at a dinner table told me something true." He glanced at Chloe briefly. "But I'm listening now, differently than before." He looked at Victoria. "And I want to build something different, with you. Not for you, with you. Different terms." He paused. "If you want that." Victoria looked at her father across a diner table on a Friday night in November. She had told Ryan, on the fire escape, that she'd given up expecting it. She had meant it. 6 months of running had not been, she understood now, sitting in this booth, eating diner food, 6 months of running from her father. It had been 6 months of trying to find out what was left of herself when the thing she'd been running toward her whole life was taken off the table. What remained when the success was stripped away. What she was when nobody was looking. And what had been left was this. The ability to sit on a cold fire escape with cheap coffee and mean it. The ability to hold a child on a stage and feel it as something that mattered in the most immediate and irreducible way. The ability to eat scrambled eggs at a table and have it be enough. That was what was left. It was more than she'd thought there'd be. "Yes," she said to her father. "I want that." He nodded. Margaret squeezed his arm. Chloe, without looking up from her pancakes, said, "Good." Ryan covered his mouth with his hand. Edward Sterling looked at Chloe with an expression that had moved fully past all the things a man like him spent his life maintaining and arrived, finally, at just a face, just a person's face, in a diner booth, in the middle of something that was remaking him in the best way and the hardest way simultaneously. "Thank you," he said to Chloe. She looked up. "For what?" "For saying the true thing," he said. "The first time, at dinner." She shrugged. "It was just true. If you can see it, you should say it." "Most people don't." "I know," she said. "That seems like a waste." She went back to her pancakes. They stayed at the diner until 9, not because anyone planned it, just because the conversation kept finding the next thing, and nobody wanted to be the one to call it. And Donna refilled the coffee twice without being asked, and the booth was warm, and outside, the November cold was fully committed and the diner was what it was. A place where people sat longer than they meant to because leaving required choosing to, and nobody was choosing yet. Chloe fell asleep in the booth at 8:45. Not fully. She was in the specific half state of a child who had stopped tracking the adult conversation but hadn't fully surrendered, head tipping sideways toward Ryan, one hand still loosely around her fork. He moved the fork, let her tip. She settled against his arm. Margaret Sterling was watching this. "She's extraordinary," she said, the same words Edward had used in the apartment 4 days ago. The words had traveled through the family, Ryan noticed, passed from one person to another, the word that kept reasserting itself whether people meant to use it or not. "Yeah," he said. "She has her father's instincts," Margaret said, "that thing of seeing people directly, not performing, just looking." She paused. "That comes from being raised by someone who does the same thing." He looked at the sleeping child against his arm. He didn't have a response for that. Not a modest one, not an adequate one, so he didn't offer one. Victoria was watching him, and when he met her eyes, she looked away first, which was not something she'd done in a while. A different kind of looking away, not avoidant, just private. He understood it. Some things you didn't put into words because the words would simplify it into something smaller than it actually was. It was a thing between them, whatever it was, and it was real, and it was not finished. He knew that. She knew that. They'd been honest about it on the fire escape, and that honesty was the foundation, and foundations didn't need to be narrated to hold. They left at 9:15. Edward paid before Ryan could, which prompted a brief argument that Edward won on the basis of velocity. He'd given Donna the card before Ryan had registered what was happening. Ryan accepted this with the grace available to someone who had been outmaneuvered cleanly. Outside on the sidewalk, the November air was sharp and honest, The way cold air was at the end of an evening when everything had been said that needed to be said, and the night was moving toward its close. Edward shook Ryan's hand. It was a different handshake from the one Ryan imagined would have happened 2 weeks ago. Less transactional, less the handshake of a man deciding what something was worth. Just two people acknowledging each other across the gap. "Come to dinner," Edward said. "Not here. At our house. Bring Chloe." He paused. "If you want." Ryan looked at him. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe is more than I expected," Edward said simply. Margaret hugged Victoria long and quietly, the kind of hug that contained everything that couldn't go in the diner booth. Then she crouched down to where Chloe, transferred to Ryan's arms and only half-conscious, was watching the world through one eye. "Thank you for letting us come tonight," Margaret said. "You can come to the spring recital too," Chloe said from the depths of half-sleep. "If you want, Gerald might be in it." Margaret looked up at Victoria. Victoria shook her head slightly. "Don't ask." The Sterlings got into the car that had been waiting half a block away. Ryan stood on the sidewalk with his sleeping daughter in his arms and Victoria beside him and watched the car pull into traffic and move down the street and turn at the corner and disappear. The street was ordinary. The November cold was ordinary. The distant sirens and the bus 3 blocks over and the couple walking past with the dog that stopped to sniff the base of the parking meter were all ordinary. He breathed it in. Victoria was looking at the corner where the car had turned. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said, and then, "Different kind of yes than I would have said 2 weeks ago." He looked at her. "Good different?" he said. "Yeah," she said. "Good different. She leaves Sunday," he knew. 2 days. She had a meeting Monday morning, boss, the first one she'd agreed to in 6 months, called with her father's chief operating officer, the first step of the returning. She'd be at her parents' house Sunday night. She'd told Ryan this on Wednesday, and he'd said okay and meant it. He meant it now too. He was not going to pretend the Sunday was easy, because it wouldn't be. Chloe would feel it more than she showed and show more than she said, and Ryan would navigate that the way he navigated everything, present, paying attention, trying not to make it harder than it already was. But the thing that would remain, the thing that Victoria had asked about on the fire escape, what's different, was this: the knowledge that the world was larger than the one he'd been living in. Not better, necessarily, not easier, just larger, more possible. 2 weeks ago, his life had been the roots and the math, and the van and Chloe, and those things were still his life, would always be the central facts of it. But they were now situated inside a larger space than they'd been before. And that space had been opened by a woman who stopped in the rain because a child fell and nobody else did. That was the whole story, really. The rest was what grew from it. He shifted Chloe's weight. She mumbled something. "I've got you," he said. "I know," she said, eyes still closed. "You always do." Victoria reached over and tucked the collar of Chloe's jacket up against the cold, the small, precise gesture of someone who noticed and acted on the noticing without needing to announce it. Ryan looked at her. She looked back. "Come on," he said. "It's cold." They walked the 4 blocks to the van. The city moved around them, indifferent and continuous, doing what cities did regardless of the small, enormous things happening inside them, the negotiations and the reconciliations and the quiet rediscoveries of what people were when they were stripped back to what they actually were. The street didn't care. The cold didn't care. The 2 orange leaves had finally let go of the scraggly tree in the alley. Ryan noticed when they passed it, and the tree stood bare and somehow lighter for it, ready for whatever came next. He buckled Chloe into the back seat. He got in. Victoria got in. He started the van. The heater came on, one side working, same as always, and the children's podcast queued up automatically from habit, and he turned it off tonight, because tonight there was no need for it. Tonight the car contained its own presence, and that was enough. He drove home. The city lights moved across the windshield in the way they always did, amber and white, the particular grammar of a city at night telling its own story in its own language. And he was tired, the good kind of tired that came at the end of a day that had actually meant something, the kind that let you sleep without the running numbers and the 3 a.m. inventory of everything you hadn't solved yet. He would sleep tonight. Tomorrow was Saturday, and Chloe would make pancakes. The first one would probably fail. She'd insisted on doing it herself now, with full creative control. And Victoria would be on the fire escape with her coffee in the cold, and he'd take the van in for the oil change he'd been putting off. And the elevator would still be broken, and the neighbor in 4D would watch his 3 channels at his reliable volume, and the world would continue in its ordinary way. And in 2 days, she'd go. And in some number of days after that, she'd come back. Not to stay, but back. That was enough. That was in fact more than enough. More than he'd had 2 weeks ago. More than he'd known to want. Sometimes that was how it worked. Not the grand arrival of the thing you'd been waiting for. Just a storm on a Tuesday night, and a child who fell, and a woman who stopped when everyone else kept walking. And in that small, unglamorous, completely ordinary moment, the hinge that everything else turned on. He parked the van, carried Chloe upstairs. The elevator was still broken. He didn't mind.